The chains around Arya Voss's wrists were not made of iron. They were made of whispers, of pointing fingers, of a courtroom full of wolves who had once called her their future alpha. Now they called her a traitor. She stood at the center of the great hall of the Silver Moon Pack, her back straight, her chin lifted, refusing to let a single tear fall in front of the pack that had raised her. Torches burned along the stone walls, throwing long shadows across the faces of people she had known her entire life. None of them met her eyes. "Arya Voss," said the voice of the Beta, cold and formal. "You stand accused of passing pack secrets to the Ashwood territory during the border conflict 3 moons ago. 6 wolves were injured because of the ambush that followed. The evidence against you is undeniable." "The evidence is a lie," Arya said, her voice steady, even though her heart pounded like a war drum. "I would never betray my own pack. You all know me. You watched me grow up in this hall." No one answered her. That silence hurt more than any accusation. At the far end of the hall, seated on the high stone throne, was her mother, Selene Voss, alpha of the Silver Moon Pack. Selene's face was carved from grief and fury in equal measure, but her eyes held no doubt, no hesitation. She had already decided. "The council has reviewed the evidence," Selene said. Her voice cracked only once, on the word evidence, and Arya hated herself for noticing, for hoping that crack meant her mother still believed in her somewhere underneath the Alpha's mask. "A message bearing your seal was found in the hands of an Ashwood scout. Coordinates of our patrol routes. Names of our warriors." "I never wrote that message," Arya said. "Someone used my seal. Someone set me up." "Who would do such a thing?" Selene asked, and there was something almost pleading in the question, as if she wanted Arya to give her a name, a reason, anything to hold on to instead of the truth staring her in the face. Arya did not have a name, not yet. She only had a terrible sinking certainty that someone close to her, someone who knew the halls of this pack house as well as she did, had wanted her gone badly enough to burn her entire future to the ground. "I don't know who did this," Arya admitted, and the words tasted like defeat. "But it was not me." The Beta stepped forward again, holding a scroll sealed with red wax. "By the law of the Silver Moon Pack, the punishment for treason is exile. Effective immediately. Arya Voss is stripped of her title as heir, stripped of her place within these lands, and cast out beyond the northern border. She is forbidden from ever returning." A murmur rippled through the hall. Somewhere near the back, Arya thought she heard someone crying, but she could not turn to look. 2 guards, wolves she had trained beside since childhood, stepped forward and took her by the arms. Their grip was not gentle. "Mother," Arya said, and it was the last time she would ever call Selene that word in front of the pack. "Please, look at me. You know me." For one moment, Selene's composure wavered. Her hands, resting on the arms of her throne, trembled slightly. But an alpha could not be seen to doubt, not in front of a hall full of wolves who needed to believe their leader was strong and certain. Selene closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, the softness was gone. "Take her to the border," Selene said quietly. "Now." The guards pulled Arya away from the throne she had once believed she would sit on someday. She did not fight them. Fighting would only prove to everyone watching that she was the dangerous, deceitful creature they now believed her to be. Instead, she walked with her head high, past the faces of pack members who had eaten at her table, trained under her sword, laughed with her during summer festivals. Not one of them stepped forward to speak in her defense. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold, thick with the smell of pine and impending rain. The guards marched her through the forest paths she had run as a child, past the training grounds where she had once been the fastest fighter in her age group, past the stream where she used to sit for hours, simply listening to the water. When they reached the northern border, marked by a line of ancient stones covered in moss, the guards released her without a word. One of them, a young wolf named Callan who had once been her closest friend, hesitated before turning away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. "I don't believe it either, but I can't say that, not out loud." Then he was gone, following the other guard back into the trees, leaving Arya alone at the edge of everything she had ever known. She stood there for a long time, staring at the stones that marked the boundary of her old life. Behind her lay the pack house, the training grounds, the mother who had just condemned her without truly listening. Ahead of her lay unclaimed wilderness, dangerous and unfamiliar, filled with rogue wolves and unknown packs who owed her nothing. Arya closed her eyes and let herself shift. Her bones cracked and reshaped. Her skin gave way to silver fur, and within moments, she stood on 4 legs instead of 2. A wolf, with fur the color of moonlight, and eyes the color of storm clouds. In this form, the pain in her chest felt slightly easier to carry, spread out across muscle and instinct, instead of concentrated entirely in her heart. She turned her back on the stones and ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her paws ached, crossing streams and climbing ridges, putting as much distance as she could between herself and the pack that no longer wanted her. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she needed to move, needed to feel the wind against her fur and the ground beneath her feet, needed anything other than the stillness that would let her thoughts catch up with her. Days passed in a blur of survival. Arya learned quickly that exile was not simply about losing a title. It was about losing everything that made life bearable. She had no pack to call for help if she was injured, no allies to share a kill with, no warm den waiting for her when the weather turned harsh. She hunted alone, slept alone, healed her own small wounds alone, and with every passing day, the wall around her heart grew thicker. She told herself this was fine. She told herself she did not need anyone. Trust had betrayed her once, in the worst way possible, delivered by the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. She would not make that mistake again. Wolves who wandered too close to her chosen territory were met with a warning growl and nothing more. She kept to herself, and slowly, the wilderness became less frightening and more familiar. A strange kind of home, built entirely on solitude. It was on a night thick with storm clouds and distant thunder that everything changed. Arya had claimed a small stretch of forest near a rocky ridge, far from any pack borders she knew of. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the ground to mud and filling the air with the smell of wet earth and pine. She had taken shelter beneath a rocky overhang, curled in her wolf form, listening to the storm rage outside. That was when she heard it, a sound beneath the thunder, faint and strained, easy to miss if she had not spent the last several weeks training her ears to catch every small disturbance in the wilderness around her. It was a whimper, low and pained, coming from somewhere down the ridge. Every instinct she had built over weeks of solitary survival told her to ignore it. Getting involved with another wolf's troubles was dangerous. It could be a trap. It could be a fight she did not want. It could be nothing but heartache waiting to happen. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and something in it struck a chord she could not silence. It sounded like suffering. It sounded like a creature who had given up hope of being found. Arya told herself she was only checking, only making sure the sound was not a threat to her own safety. She rose from her shelter and moved carefully through the rain, following the sound down the slope of the ridge, her paws slipping slightly on the wet stone. What she found at the bottom made her stop completely still. A wolf, easily twice her size, lay collapsed in a shallow ditch filled with rainwater. His fur, a deep charcoal gray, was matted and dark with mud and something else, something that made her chest tighten with alarm. Deep gashes marked his side, clearly from claws, not from any accident of the wilderness. Someone had attacked him, and attacked him badly. His breathing was shallow and uneven, each breath seeming to cost him enormous effort. For a long moment, Arya simply stood there, rain pouring down around her, staring at the massive wounded creature in front of her. Every lesson she had taught herself over the past weeks screamed at her to walk away. He was a stranger. He was enormous, easily strong enough to hurt her if he woke disoriented and afraid. Helping him meant risk, meant vulnerability, meant the exact kind of trust that had gotten her exiled in the first place. But then his eyes opened, just barely, and met hers. They were a striking shade of amber, even dulled by pain and blood loss, and there was something in them that struck her deeply, something raw and desperate and utterly without pretense. This was not a wolf plotting deception. This was a creature simply trying to survive, the same as she had been trying to do every single day since her exile. "I'm not going to hurt you," Arya said quietly, shifting back into her human form despite the freezing rain, needing her hands to help him. Her voice came out rougher than she intended, unused to speaking after so long alone. Just stay still." The wolf's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but he did not have the strength to do much more than that. His eyes fluttered closed again, his breathing growing even more shallow. Arya's mind raced. She had no pack healer to call for, no warm den stocked with medicine, nothing but her own 2 hands, and whatever she could find in the forest around her. Every part of her wanted to turn around and disappear back into the rain, to protect the fragile peace she had built for herself in solitude. Getting attached to another living creature, watching him possibly die despite her efforts, opening her heart even a little after everything that had happened to her, felt like walking directly toward more pain. But she thought of Callan's whispered apology at the border. She thought of the silence in the great hall when she had needed someone, anyone, to speak in her defense. She thought about what kind of person she wanted to be, exile or not, and she knew she could not simply walk away from a dying creature and call herself blameless. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Okay, I've got you." She knelt beside him in the mud and rain, examining the wounds as carefully as she could in the darkness. The gashes along his side were deep, but, as far as she could tell without proper light, had not struck anything vital. He had lost blood, a great deal of it, and exposure to the cold rain was making his condition worse by the minute. If she left him here, he would not survive the night. There was a cave she had discovered a few days earlier, tucked into the base of the ridge, dry and sheltered from the worst of the weather. It was not close, and he was far too large and too weak to walk there on his own. Arya took a steadying breath, shifted back into her wolf form, and carefully, painstakingly, began to help him move. It took nearly an hour to get him to the cave, an hour of pushing, guiding, and half-carrying his enormous weight across slick ground, while rain continued to fall around them. By the time they reached the shelter of the cave, Arya's muscles ached with exhaustion, and her paws were raw, but the massive gray wolf was finally out of the storm. She shifted back into her human form once more, breathing hard, and looked down at the wolf now lying still on the dry cave floor. His breathing was slightly steadier than before, though still weak, still uncertain. "You'd better not die on me," she murmured, gathering what dry moss and leaves she could find nearby, to pack against his wounds, slowing whatever bleeding remained. "I did not drag you all this way for nothing." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and rain continued to hammer the rocks. Inside the small cave, Arya Voss, exiled Luna of the Silver Moon Pack, sat beside a stranger she knew nothing about, tending wounds she had no training to properly treat, driven by nothing but a strange, stubborn refusal to let another living thing suffer alone the way she had been suffering alone for weeks. She did not know his name. She did not know how he had been wounded, or who had wounded him, or what kind of life he had left behind, before ending up bleeding in a ditch in the middle of nowhere. She only knew that something about his eyes, that flash of desperate, silent trust before he lost consciousness, had reached through the wall she had built around her heart and cracked it, just slightly, for the first time since her exile began. As the storm raged on outside, Arya settled in beside the massive wolf, prepared to watch through the night to see if he would survive until morning. She had no idea, not even the smallest suspicion, that the creature breathing weakly beside her was not simply another wandering wolf, caught in a territorial dispute. She had no idea she was looking after the most powerful and feared alpha in the entire region, a king whose name alone made rival packs tremble, a king who, for reasons she could not yet imagine, had been left for dead by his own enemies in the middle of a storm. All she knew, as she pressed a hand gently against his uninjured shoulder and felt the faint, steady rhythm of his heartbeat, was that she was not going to let him die, not on her watch, not after everything the wilderness had already taken from her. The rain continued through the night, and somewhere beneath its steady rhythm, two broken lives had just quietly, unknowingly, begun to intertwine. Hours passed slowly inside the cave. Arya kept watch, feeding small twigs into a tiny fire she managed to start near the entrance, careful to keep the flames low so the light would not carry far into the darkness. She had learned early in her exile that fire could attract as much danger as it could keep away. Out here, nothing was ever completely safe. The wolf beside her stirred occasionally, low sounds of pain escaping him even while unconscious. Each time, Arya found herself leaning closer, checking his breathing, adjusting the moss packed against his wounds, whispering quiet words of reassurance, even though she knew he could not hear them. "You picked a bad night to almost die," she told him at one point, mostly to fill the silence, mostly to remind herself she was not entirely alone anymore, even if her companion could not respond. Storms like this do not care whether you are strong or weak. They take from everyone equally. She thought of her own first storm alone in the wilderness, weeks earlier, when she had been the one curled beneath a rocky outcrop with nothing but her own fur to keep her warm, wondering if she would survive until the sun rose. She had survived. She had told herself that survival was enough, that she did not need comfort or companionship, only the will to keep moving forward. Yet here she was, risking her limited resources, her carefully guarded solitude, her fragile safety, all for a stranger who might not even live to see morning. As the fire crackled softly, Arya allowed herself, just this once, to think about the life she had lost. She thought of her mother's throne room, the weight of the silver circlet she had once expected to wear someday as Alpha. She thought of the training grounds where she had sparred with pack warriors twice her size, and never once lost her footing. She thought of Callan's whispered apology, and wondered if he ever thought about her now, whether the pack ever spoke her name at all, or whether she had simply become a story told in hushed voices, a warning about the price of betrayal. She wondered who had truly sent that message to the Ashwood scouts. She wondered whose seal had been forged, whose hand had written words designed to destroy her entire future in a single stroke. The thought burned in her chest, like a coal that refused to cool, but she had no answers, only questions that followed her every step through the wilderness. The wolf beside her let out another low sound, and this time his eyes opened again, hazy and unfocused, searching the darkness of the cave until they found her. "Hey," Arya said softly, keeping her voice calm despite the sudden flare of nerves in her chest. A wolf his size, disoriented and afraid, could be dangerous, even without meaning to be. "You're safe. I'm not here to hurt you." His amber eyes stayed locked on hers for several long seconds, and something in his gaze seemed to search her, to weigh her intentions, the way any wounded creature would weigh the intentions of a stranger looming over it. Whatever he found in her expression seemed to settle something in him, because the tension in his massive frame eased slightly, and his eyes slowly closed again as exhaustion pulled him back under. Arya let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Good," she murmured. "Rest. I'll keep watch." The rest of the night passed in slow, careful vigilance. Arya dozed only in short bursts, always waking at the smallest sound, always checking on her unexpected companion, before allowing herself to drift again. By the time the first gray light of dawn began creeping into the cave entrance, she was exhausted, her body aching from a night spent tending wounds and warding off sleep. But the wolf beside her was still breathing, still fighting, still alive. She allowed herself a small, tired smile at that. It was not much, but out here, survival counted as victory, and she would take every victory she could get. With daylight came new problems. The wolf needed real food to regain his strength, more than the small scraps of dried meat she had been rationing for herself over the past weeks. He needed clean water, and the moss packed against his wounds would need to be changed soon to prevent infection. Arya studied his still form for a long moment, weighing the risks of leaving him alone, to hunt against the certainty that he would not survive without proper nourishment. She decided quickly, the way she had learned to decide most things since her exile began. Hesitation wasted time, and time was the one resource she could never get back. "I'm going to find food," she told him, even though he could not hear her, even though speaking to an unconscious wolf probably meant she had spent too many weeks alone in the wilderness. "Don't you dare die while I'm gone." She shifted into her wolf form and slipped out of the cave, moving quickly and quietly through the wet forest, her senses sharp for any sign of danger or opportunity. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and glistening, birds calling out from the dripping branches overhead, the scent of damp earth thick in the cold morning air. It did not take long to catch a rabbit near the base of the ridge, and she carried it back to the cave with quick, efficient movements, unwilling to waste time that could mean the difference between her companion's survival and his death. When she returned, he was exactly where she had left him, chest still rising and falling in slow, labored breaths. She shifted back to human form and set about preparing what she could, cooking a portion over the small fire for herself, while leaving the rest raw and within his reach for whenever he regained enough strength to eat. She replaced the moss packed against his wounds with fresh material, wincing in sympathy at the deep gashes marking his side, wondering again what kind of creature could have inflicted such damage on a wolf clearly built for strength and combat. Whoever had attacked him had wanted him dead, not simply defeated. That thought settled uneasily in her stomach as she worked. This was not the aftermath of a simple territorial skirmish between rival wolves. This felt deliberate, calculated, the kind of violence born from serious enmity rather than accident. Just what kind of trouble had wandered into her carefully guarded solitude? As the day wore on, Arya found herself watching the wolf more closely than she probably should have. There was something about him that felt different from the ordinary rogue wolves she had encountered during her weeks of exile. Something in the sheer size and strength, evident even in his weakened state. Something in the quiet dignity of his stillness that suggested he was accustomed to being far more than he currently appeared to be. She told herself it did not matter. Whoever he was, whatever life he had left behind, he was simply another wounded creature who needed help, and she was simply the exile who happened to find him. Once he healed, he would leave, return to whatever pack or territory he called home, and she would return to her solitary existence, exactly as before. That was the sensible outcome. That was the outcome that kept her heart safely guarded, protected from the kind of trust that had already cost her everything once before. Yet as evening approached and she settled back beside him for another night of careful watching, Arya found herself hoping, quietly and against her own better judgment, that whoever this stranger turned out to be, he might prove different from everyone else who had failed her. She had no way of knowing, as the second night of storm clouds gathered once more over the ridge, that the massive gray wolf breathing steadily beside her was Kaelin Thorne, the Alpha King, whose name struck fear into the hearts of enemy packs across the entire northern territories. A king who had been ambushed and left for dead by assassins from his own inner circle. A king whose survival now depended entirely on the compassion of a woman the world believed to be a traitor. Neither of them could have guessed, in that quiet, firelit cave, just how deeply their two shattered lives were about to become entangled, or how much danger still waited for them both beyond the safety of the storm. 3 days passed before the wolf finally opened his eyes, and stayed conscious for more than a few scattered minutes. Arya had fallen into a careful rhythm by then, hunting in the early mornings, tending his wounds twice a day, and spending the quiet hours in between sharpening a spare branch into a crude weapon, just in case whatever had attacked him decided to come looking for him again. She did not know who his enemies were, but she was not foolish enough to assume danger had passed simply because the storm had. On the third evening, as she knelt beside him changing the moss packed against his healing wounds, she felt his body tense beneath her hands. She looked up to find his amber eyes fully open, clear and alert for the first time since she had found him, studying her with sharp, focused attention. "There you are," she said, keeping her voice calm and even. "You gave me quite a scare, you know. I was starting to think I was talking to myself out here." The wolf did not respond, of course, could not respond in this form, but something in his gaze seemed almost amused, a flicker of understanding passing between them despite the absence of words. He tried to shift his weight, testing his injured side, and let out a low sound somewhere between a growl and a whimper when the movement pulled at his healing wounds. "Careful," Arya said quickly, resting a steadying hand on his uninjured shoulder. "You're not ready to move yet. The gashes on your side are healing, but they need more time before you start testing them." He settled back down, watching her with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable, though not in a way that frightened her. It was the way he studied her, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle, trying to understand who exactly had chosen to save him when she owed him nothing at all. "You probably want to know why I helped you," Arya said, sitting back on her heels, surprised at how easily the words came after weeks of near-total silence. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure myself. I heard you out there in the storm, and I told myself I was only checking to make sure you weren't a threat. But then I saw you, and I couldn't just leave you there." The wolf's ears flicked forward, listening, and Arya found herself continuing, the words spilling out of her the way water spills over a dam that has finally cracked. "I know what it feels like to be left behind by people who should have helped you," she said quietly, her eyes drifting toward the fire, rather than meeting his gaze. "I was exiled from my own pack a few weeks ago, falsely accused of something I never did. My own mother sent me away, without even really listening to me. So when I heard you out there, hurt and alone, I suppose I just couldn't be the kind of person who walks away from someone in trouble. Even if that someone is a total stranger, even if it's dangerous. She glanced back at him, half expecting to see nothing but animal indifference in his expression, the way most wolves in beast form communicated only the simplest instincts. Instead, she found something that looked remarkably like empathy, an understanding far too complex for an ordinary wolf caught in a territorial dispute. "You're a strange one," she murmured, more to herself than to him, shaking off the odd feeling that he understood every word she said. "Anyway, rest. You need it." Over the following days, his strength returned steadily. He began eating on his own, the wounds along his side closing cleanly, thanks to her careful attention, and soon, he was able to stand and move short distances around the cave without wincing in pain. Arya found herself growing increasingly curious about him, wondering what pack he belonged to, wondering who had attacked him and why, but she kept her questions to herself, unwilling to press a wounded creature who could not answer even if he wanted to. What she did not expect was the quiet companionship that grew between them during those days of recovery. She had grown so accustomed to solitude that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to share space with another living creature who did not judge her, did not demand explanations, did not care that she carried the label of traitor wherever she went. The wolf simply existed beside her, watching her hunt, watching her tend the fire, watching her with those intelligent amber eyes that seemed to understand far more than any ordinary animal should. She talked to him more than she probably should have, filling the long quiet hours with stories of her old life, her training as heir to the Silver Moon Pack, her frustration at the injustice of her exile, her uncertainty about what came next. She never expected answers, and she told herself the talking was simply a way to keep her own mind from unraveling in the isolation of the wilderness. But somewhere along the way, it became something more than that. It became a genuine comfort, a release valve for emotions she had been holding tightly locked away since the night of her banishment. One evening, as she sat cleaning the small blade she had fashioned from a sharpened stone, she noticed the wolf watching her with unusual intensity, his gaze flicking between her face and the darkening sky beyond the cave entrance. "What is it?" she asked, following his gaze outward. The forest beyond looked ordinary enough, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped toward the horizon, but something in his posture had shifted, a new tension coiling through his massive frame. He rose slowly to his feet, testing his healing side, and moved toward the cave entrance, his ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. Arya felt a chill of unease settle over her, trusting his instincts even though she could not identify the source of his sudden alertness. "Do you smell something?" she whispered, reaching for the crude weapon she kept close at hand. The wolf let out a low growl, deep and warning, and Arya's pulse quickened. In all the days she had spent caring for him, she had never heard him make a sound like that, a sound that spoke clearly of danger, recognized and taken seriously. She moved to his side, peering out into the deepening shadows of the forest, straining her senses for whatever had caught his attention. For several long moments, nothing happened. The forest remained still, the only sounds the distant call of birds settling in for the night, and the soft rustle of wind through the trees. Then, faint but unmistakable, she caught it too. The scent of unfamiliar wolves, several of them, moving through the forest not far from their position. Not the scent of rogue wanderers passing through by chance, but something more organized, more deliberate, the coordinated movement of a hunting party searching for something specific. Or someone specific. "They're looking for you," Arya realized quietly, glancing at the healing gashes still visible along the wolf's side, understanding suddenly that whoever had attacked him days ago might not have given up simply because their initial attempt had failed. "Whoever did this to you, they're still out there." The wolf's growl deepened, his body tensing, with barely restrained aggression despite his still healing wounds, and Arya understood immediately that if those searching wolves found them here, in a cave with limited escape routes, and one of them still recovering from serious injury, they would be in serious trouble. "We need to move," she said, already gathering the few supplies she had accumulated during her weeks alone. "You're not fully healed, but staying here is more dangerous than moving. Can you walk?" He turned to look at her, and something passed between them in that shared glance, an unspoken agreement, a fragile trust built over days of careful care and quiet companionship. He nodded, an oddly human gesture for a wolf, and pushed himself fully upright despite the obvious effort it cost him. Together they slipped out of the cave and into the gathering darkness, moving as quietly as they could, away from the direction of the approaching scent. Arya kept close to his side, ready to support him if his healing wounds gave out, her senses straining for any sign that the hunting party had picked up their trail. They moved for what felt like hours, weaving through unfamiliar terrain, crossing streams to mask their scent, climbing rocky slopes that would be difficult for pursuers to track. The wolf's pace slowed gradually, as exhaustion and pain caught up with his still recovering body, but he pushed forward without complaint, matching Arya's urgency with quiet, determined resolve. Finally, as the moon rose high overhead, they found a new shelter, a shallow overhang tucked into a hillside far from their previous location, well hidden by thick brush and difficult terrain. Arya helped him settle into the space, checking his wounds carefully for any sign that the strenuous movement had caused further damage. "You did well," she told him quietly, relief evident in her voice, as she confirmed the wounds had held despite the exertion. "We should be safe here, at least for tonight." The wolf let out a tired breath, settling into the shelter beside her, and for the first time since she had found him bleeding in the storm, Arya allowed herself to truly consider the danger surrounding them both. Whoever had attacked him was serious enough about finishing the job to send an entire hunting party searching the wilderness. That level of determination suggested he was not simply an ordinary wolf who had run afoul of a territorial dispute. He was someone important, someone whose death mattered enough to warrant this kind of coordinated effort. As she settled in beside him for another night of watching, Arya found herself studying his face in the moonlight, wondering, not for the first time, exactly who she had chosen to protect, and what kind of danger she had unknowingly welcomed into the fragile peace of her exile. Whatever the answer, she realized with quiet determination, she was already too invested to walk away now. Whoever this wolf was, whatever secrets he carried, she would see him through to safety, even if it meant facing whatever enemies were hunting him through the darkness of the forest that had become her only home. Morning arrived quietly, sunlight filtering through the thick brush covering their new shelter, and Arya woke to find the wolf already alert, watching the tree line beyond their hiding place with careful attention. She sat up slowly, muscles stiff from sleeping on hard ground, and studied his posture for any sign of renewed danger. "Anything?" she asked softly. He shook his head slightly, and she released a breath of relief. Whatever hunting party had passed through the forest the previous night seemed to have moved on, at least for now, though she knew better than to assume the danger had disappeared entirely. They stayed hidden through the morning, Arya venturing out only briefly to check their surroundings and gather a small amount of food, always returning quickly to the shelter where the wolf waited. His wounds, though tested by the previous night's exertion, appeared to be healing well, the swelling around the gashes reduced, the discoloration fading slightly with each passing day. As the sun climbed higher, Arya found herself once again filling the silence with conversation, a habit she had grown into over the past week that she was not entirely sure she wanted to break. "I keep wondering who you really are," she admitted, watching him from across the small shelter. "You're clearly not just an ordinary wolf. The way you move, even injured, the way you sensed those hunters before I could smell anything at all, and someone wants you dead badly enough to send a search party after you. That's not the kind of trouble that follows just anyone." The wolf's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable, and for a moment, Arya thought she saw something like reluctance in his expression, as if he wished he could answer her, but knew he could not in this form. "It's fine," she said, offering a small, tired smile. "You don't have to tell me anything. I understand what it's like to carry secrets you're not ready to share. Heaven knows I have enough of my own." She thought again of the sealed message that had condemned her, the forged coordinates, the betrayal that had come from somewhere within her own pack's walls. Whoever had framed her was still out there, likely still within the Silver Moon pack, continuing their life without consequence while she paid the price for a crime she never committed. The thought still burned, even weeks later, a wound that refused to close no matter how much time passed. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" she said quietly, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. An exiled Luna and a wolf being hunted by unknown enemies, hiding together under a bush in the middle of nowhere. The wolf let out a low sound that almost resembled a huff of amusement, and despite everything, Despite the danger still lurking somewhere in the forest around them, Arya felt a small, genuine smile tug at her lips. As evening approached once more, they decided it was time to move again, putting further distance between themselves and wherever the hunting party had last been scented. The wolf's strength had improved enough that he could travel at a steady pace, and together they made their way deeper into unfamiliar territory, guided by nothing but instinct and the shared understanding that safety lay only in constant movement. They traveled for 2 more days, resting only when necessary, sharing what little food Arya could gather along the way. With each passing hour, the bond between them deepened, built not on words but on shared survival, shared vigilance, shared trust, earned through action rather than promises. On the second night, as they settled into yet another temporary shelter, this one a hollow beneath the roots of an ancient fallen tree, Arya noticed the wolf watching her, with an expression that had grown increasingly familiar over their days together, something warm and quietly grateful beneath the surface of his animal features. "You know," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "I think you might be the first creature in weeks who hasn't judged me for what happened. You don't know the whole story, obviously, but you've never once looked at me like I'm something dangerous or untrustworthy. It's strange how much that matters, coming from someone who can't even speak." The wolf shifted closer to her in the darkness, resting his head gently near her knee, and Arya felt something in her chest loosen slightly, a tension she had been carrying since the night of her exile beginning, just barely, to ease. "Whoever you are," she whispered, running a careful hand along his uninjured shoulder, "thank you for trusting me. It's been a long time since anyone did." Neither of them could have known, in that quiet moment beneath the ancient roots, that the wolf resting beside her was Kalen Thorne, Alpha King of the Ashwood Territories, a leader whose enemies believed him dead, hiding not only from assassins, but from the truth of his own identity, uncertain how the woman who had saved his life would react once she learned exactly who she had been protecting all along. For now, in the safety of the darkness, they were simply 2 broken souls finding unexpected comfort in each other's company, unaware of how quickly everything was about to change. The scream tore through the night, before Arya even understood what was happening. She had been half asleep, curled beneath the roots of the fallen tree, when a sudden violent shift in the air beside her jolted her fully awake. Bones cracked and reshaped in the darkness, a sound she knew intimately from her own transformations, but this time it belonged to someone else entirely. She scrambled backward instinctively, reaching for the sharpened stone blade she kept close, before her eyes adjusted enough to understand what she was seeing. Where the massive gray wolf had been lying moments before, a man now knelt in his place, breathing hard, his bare chest marked with the same healing gashes she had spent days tending in his wolf form. Even in the dim moonlight filtering through the tree roots, she could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, built with the kind of strength that came from a lifetime of combat rather than simple training. His dark hair was damp with sweat, and his amber eyes, the same striking color she had grown familiar with over the past week, found hers immediately. "You can talk," Arya breathed, lowering the blade slowly, her mind racing to catch up with what she was seeing. "I can," the man said, his voice deep and rough, clearly strained from the effort of shifting while still healing. "I'm sorry. I should have found a way to tell you sooner, but shifting back too early, while still injured, is dangerous, and I wasn't certain I could control it safely until now." Arya stared at him, 100 questions crowding her mind at once, but the most pressing one pushed its way to the front. "Who are you?" The man hesitated, just for a moment, something guarded passing behind his eyes before he answered. "My name is Cade," he said. "I was ambushed near the border of my territory. I don't fully remember everything that happened, only that I was outnumbered and left for dead. If you hadn't found me, I wouldn't have survived the night." Arya studied him carefully, searching his face for any sign of deception, but found only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine gratitude. Still, something about the way he had hesitated before answering nagged at her instincts, a small warning she chose, for now, to set aside. "Cade," she repeated slowly, testing the name. "Well, Cade, you should probably know that I'm the reason you're still alive, so I'd appreciate a little honesty going forward." A faint, tired smile touched his lips, softening the sharp lines of his face. "I owe you my life," he said quietly. I intend to repay that debt, in whatever way I can. You can start by telling me who attacked you, Arya said, settling back against the tree roots, keeping a careful distance between them, despite the strange pull she felt toward him. And why there was an entire hunting party searching the forest for you afterward. Cade's expression darkened, the warmth fading into something colder and more calculating. I have enemies, he said simply. Powerful ones. I made choices as a leader that some wolves disagreed with. Choices that protected my people but cost others dearly. It seems some of them decided I was better removed permanently. A leader, Arya repeated, her suspicion sharpening. Leader of what, exactly? Another hesitation, longer this time. A small territory, Cade said carefully. Not important right now. What matters is that staying near you puts you in danger as well, and I won't allow that, after everything you've already sacrificed to keep me alive. I can handle danger, Arya said, a hint of steel entering her voice. I've been surviving alone in this wilderness for weeks. I don't need protecting. I'm not trying to protect you, Cade said, meeting her gaze evenly. I'm trying to repay a debt without dragging you further into my problems than I already have. They stared at each other for a long moment, tension crackling in the space between them, and Arya found herself, despite everything, reluctant to simply let him walk away and disappear back into whatever dangerous world he had come from. There was still so much she did not know about him, so many gaps in his story that did not quite fit together, but underneath the uncertainty, she felt a genuine connection that had grown steadily over their days together, one she was not ready to abandon simply because he now had a human voice. Where would you even go? She asked finally, her tone softening slightly. You're still healing. Your enemies are still searching the forest. You have no idea what territory you've even wandered into. Walking off alone right now is more likely to get you killed than staying with me. Cade studied her expression carefully, clearly weighing her words against his own instinct to protect her by leaving. You make a fair point, he admitted eventually. Perhaps a few more days, until I'm stronger. Then I'll find a way to deal with my enemies, without putting you at further risk. Good, Arya said, relief coloring her voice more than she intended to reveal. Now, since you can actually speak now, you can help me figure out our next move, instead of me guessing, based on growls and ear twitches. That surprised a genuine laugh out of him, low and warm, and something in Arya's chest fluttered unexpectedly at the sound. She pushed the feeling aside quickly, reminding herself that trusting too easily had already cost her everything once before. Over the following 2 days, their dynamic shifted significantly now that Cade could communicate freely. He proved to be sharp-minded and strategic, offering suggestions about safer travel routes, ways to mask their scent more effectively, methods of setting up their shelter to allow quick escape if danger approached. Arya found herself impressed, despite her lingering wariness, recognizing in him the kind of tactical thinking she had once been trained to possess herself as heir to her pack. You've clearly led people before, she observed one afternoon, watching him carefully assess their surroundings from a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow valley. This isn't just survival instinct, this is command experience. Cade glanced at her, something unreadable flickering across his features, before he offered a non-committal shrug. I've had to make difficult decisions, he said simply, deflecting without directly lying. It teaches you to think several steps ahead. Arya let the topic drop, sensing his reluctance to elaborate further, though her curiosity about his true identity only continued to grow. There was a weight to the way he carried himself, an authority in his posture, even while exhausted and injured, that suggested he was far more significant than an ordinary wolf caught in an unfortunate conflict. That evening, as they settled into their shelter for the night, Cade turned the conversation toward her instead, clearly noticing how skillfully she had been avoiding her own story over the past days. You mentioned you were exiled, he said carefully, watching her reaction closely. Falsely accused, you said. What happened? Arya's shoulders tensed slightly, old pain resurfacing at the reminder, but something about Cade's steady, patient gaze made her want to share the truth, rather than deflect the way he so often did with his own past. I was accused of passing pack secrets to a rival territory, she said quietly, staring into the small fire they had allowed themselves that night. Someone forged my seal on a message that led to an ambush against my own pack's warriors. 6 of them were injured. My mother, who is Alpha of the Silver Moon Pack, believed the evidence over her own daughter, and had me exiled without ever truly listening to my side of things. Cade's expression darkened as he listened, something protective and angry stirring behind his amber eyes. "Someone framed you," he said, his voice low. "Someone close enough to your pack to forge your seal and craft a believable lie." "That's what I keep coming back to," Arya said, nodding. "Someone within my own pack wanted me gone badly enough to destroy my entire future. I just don't know who, or why. Do you have any suspicions?" Cade asked, leaning forward slightly, his full attention focused on her in a way that made her feel, for the first time in weeks, genuinely heard. Arya hesitated, turning the question over in her mind. "There were wolves who resented my position as heir," she admitted slowly. "Some who believed the throne should belong to a different bloodline entirely. But I never imagined any of them capable of something this calculated, this cruel." "Ambition changes people," Cade said quietly, a hint of something personal and pained coloring his tone, as if he spoke from experience rather than mere observation. "Sometimes the people closest to us are capable of things we could never have imagined, simply because we never wanted to see the truth of who they really were." Arya studied him carefully, wondering what history lay behind those words. What betrayal of his own had taught him such a hard lesson? But before she could ask, he seemed to catch himself, straightening slightly and offering a small, apologetic smile. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's not something you need to carry along with your own troubles. You can talk to me too, you know," Arya said softly. "I've shared enough of my own pain with you over the past week, even before you could answer back." Cade's gaze softened, something warm and grateful passing across his features. "Perhaps someday," he said quietly. "For now, just know that I understand betrayal from people you trusted. More than you might realize." They sat in comfortable silence after that, the fire crackling gently between them, and Arya found herself studying his profile in the flickering light, wondering again about the secrets he still carried, the identity he continued to hide beneath the simple name of Cade. Whatever the truth turned out to be, she found herself, despite every hard-learned lesson from her exile, beginning to trust him anyway. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. Trust had cost her everything once before. But something about the quiet strength in Cade's presence, the genuine gratitude in his eyes, the careful way he protected her even while claiming he did not want to burden her with his own troubles, made her believe, cautiously and against her better judgment, that this time might be different. She had no way of knowing how right and how wrong that instinct truly was. The following morning brought a change in the weather, gray clouds rolling in from the west, promising more rain before nightfall. Cade insisted on helping gather supplies despite Arya's protests that he should rest further, and she quickly learned that arguing with him once he had decided something was nearly impossible. "I've spent enough days lying still," he said, testing his balance carefully as he stood at the edge of their shelter. "I heal faster than most, and honestly, staying active helps more than it hurts at this point. Let me help, please." Arya relented, watching him carefully as they moved through the forest together, gathering firewood and searching for anything edible among the undergrowth. His movements were still slightly stiff, favoring his healing side, but his strength was returning quickly, faster than she had expected given the severity of his original injuries. "You really do heal fast," she observed, watching him lift a fallen branch with only a slight wince. "Faster than any wolf I've ever known." Cade's expression flickered with something like caution, before smoothing back into casual ease. "Good genetics, I suppose," he said lightly, though Arya noticed the deflection, and filed it away among the growing collection of small inconsistencies surrounding his story. As they worked, Cade asked her more about her life before the exile, and Arya found herself sharing memories she had not spoken aloud in weeks. She told him about her childhood training in the Pack's combat arena, about the summer festivals where her mother would let her stay up late around the bonfires, listening to the elders tell old stories of the first wolves. She told him about Callan, her closest friend since childhood, and the guilt she still carried over his whispered apology at the border, wondering if he had ever tried to speak up for her after she was gone. "He sounds like a good friend," Cade said quietly, listening with genuine interest. "It takes courage to admit doubt, even privately, when everyone around you has already decided the truth." "I suppose," Arya said, though the memory still stung. I just wish he had said something before I was cast out, not after, when it no longer mattered. Fear does strange things to loyalty, Cade said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested personal experience once again. Sometimes, the people who care about us most are also the ones most afraid to lose everything by standing against the crowd. Arya glanced at him curiously, wondering once more what history had shaped such careful, weary wisdom in someone who claimed to be simply a wolf caught in unfortunate circumstances. But she had learned over the past days not to push too hard, sensing that whatever secrets Cade carried, he would share them only when he was ready. By midday, they had gathered enough supplies to last several more days, and Cade suggested reinforcing their current shelter, rather than moving again immediately, given how well hidden it remained, and how much his strength had already improved. If we move too often without reason, we risk running directly into danger we could have avoided by staying still, he explained, arranging fallen branches to better conceal the entrance to their hollow beneath the ancient tree roots. Predictable patterns of movement can be tracked. Staying hidden and alert is often safer than constant flight. Arya nodded, recognizing the same strategic thinking she had noticed before, further confirmation that Cade possessed far more combat and leadership experience than an ordinary wolf ever would. She helped him strengthen their shelter, weaving branches and leaves into a more effective barrier against both weather and prying eyes, working together with an efficiency that surprised them both. As the afternoon wore on, and the promised rain began to fall in a light, steady drizzle, they retreated into the newly reinforced shelter, grateful for the improved protection against the elements. Sitting close together in the confined space, Arya found herself acutely aware of Cade's presence beside her, the warmth of him, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him even in stillness. "Thank you," Cade said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "for everything you've done. I don't think you fully understand how rare it is, in my experience, for someone to help a complete stranger without expecting anything in return. Most people I've encountered want something before they're willing to offer assistance. That sounds like a lonely way to live," Arya said quietly, studying his profile in the dim light filtering through their shelter's covering. "Always wondering what people want from you." "It is," Cade admitted, something vulnerable slipping through his usually guarded expression. "You learn to expect it, eventually. Which is why finding someone who genuinely doesn't want anything, who helps simply because it's the right thing to do, feels almost unbelievable." Arya felt her cheeks warm slightly at the intensity in his gaze, and she looked away, focusing on the sound of rain against their shelter's covering, rather than the way her heart had begun to beat a little faster in his presence. "I know what it's like to be surrounded by people who only care about what you can offer them," she said quietly. "My entire life, I was valued as the future alpha, the heir who would strengthen the pack's position. When that usefulness was called into question, everything I thought I meant to people disappeared overnight. So believe me, I understand the loneliness you're describing." Cade reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away if she wished, and rested a gentle hand over hers where it lay on the ground between them. "You mean something now," he said quietly, his voice rough with sincerity. "Not because of a title or a bloodline, because of who you actually are." The rain continued to fall steadily outside their shelter, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, simply sitting together in the quiet warmth of a connection that had grown, unexpectedly, and against every hard lesson Arya had learned since her exile began, into something that felt dangerously close to trust. As evening settled over the forest, their peaceful moment was shattered by a sound neither of them wanted to hear, distant but unmistakable, the howl of a wolf calling out across the valley, followed shortly by an answering call from another direction entirely. Cade's entire body went rigid beside her, his earlier warmth replaced instantly by sharp, focused alertness. "They found our trail," he said quietly, already moving to gather what few supplies they could carry quickly. "We need to move, now." Arya's heart pounded as she scrambled to gather their belongings, adrenaline sharpening her senses, as the reality of their danger crashed back into focus. Whatever quiet peace they had found together in their reinforced shelter, whatever fragile trust had begun to bloom between them, would have to wait. Survival demanded their full attention now, and somewhere out in the darkening forest, the enemies who had already nearly killed Cade once were closing in for a second attempt. "Stay close to me," Cade said, his voice low and commanding, every trace of vulnerability replaced by the sharp, decisive authority of someone accustomed to leading others through danger. Whatever happens, stay close. Arya nodded, gripping her crude blade tightly, and together they slipped out into the rain-soaked darkness, moving swiftly away from their shelter as the howls behind them grew steadily closer, carrying with them a threat that neither of them could afford to underestimate. They moved swiftly through the darkened forest, rain soaking through their clothes and hair, the howls behind them rising and falling as the hunting party communicated across the valley, coordinating their search with practiced precision. Arya's lungs burned with the effort of keeping pace, but she pushed through the exhaustion, trusting Cade's lead as he navigated the unfamiliar terrain with surprising confidence. "This way," he whispered, guiding her toward a narrow ravine cut deep into the hillside, water rushing along its bottom from the accumulated rainfall. "If we cross the stream here, it will mask our scent for at least a little while." They scrambled down the steep bank, the cold water rising to their knees as they waded through the swift current, careful to keep their footing on the slick stones beneath the surface. Arya gripped a nearby branch for balance, grateful for Cade's steadying hand on her arm when her foot slipped against a loose rock. On the far side of the ravine, they climbed the opposite bank and pressed onward, deeper into unfamiliar territory, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the searching wolves. The howls grew fainter behind them, though never disappearing entirely, a constant reminder that safety remained just out of reach. After nearly an hour of relentless movement, Cade finally slowed, glancing back over his shoulder to confirm they were not being directly pursued. "I think we've lost them. For now," he said quietly, though the tension in his shoulders remained visible even in the darkness. "But they won't give up easily. We should keep moving until we find somewhere more defensible to rest." Arya nodded, too breathless to respond immediately, and they continued forward at a slower but still urgent pace until they discovered a small cluster of boulders, providing decent cover from the open forest around them. They settled into the narrow space between the rocks, both of them soaked and exhausted, listening carefully for any sign that their pursuers had picked up the trail once more. "Who are they?" Arya finally asked, once her breathing had steadied enough to speak clearly. "The wolves hunting you. You still haven't told me who they are, or why they want you dead so badly." Cade was quiet for a long moment, staring out into the darkness beyond their hiding place, clearly wrestling with how much truth he was willing to share. "They work for someone with a great deal of power," he said carefully. "Someone who believes my death would benefit them significantly. I can't say more than that right now, not because I don't trust you, but because the less you know, the safer you remain, if they ever catch up to us." "That's not exactly comforting," Arya said, frustration coloring her exhausted voice. "I've saved your life, hidden you, fed you, and now I'm running through a rainstorm being hunted by wolves I know nothing about. I think I've earned a little more honesty." Cade turned to look at her, guilt evident in his expression even through the darkness. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "You deserve more than I've given you, and I promise, once we're safely away from immediate danger, I'll tell you everything. I just need a little more time." Arya studied him carefully, weighing his words against the growing collection of unanswered questions surrounding him, but exhaustion and the immediate need for continued vigilance won out over her frustration. "Fine," she said eventually, "but I'm holding you to that promise." "You have my word," Cade said, and something in the solemn weight of his tone made her believe him, despite everything still unexplained. They remained hidden among the boulders for the rest of the night, taking turns keeping watch while the other rested, though neither of them slept deeply given the lingering danger. By the time dawn broke over the forest, gray and misty after the night's rain, the howls had long since faded into silence, and cautious relief began to settle over them both. "I think we're safe, for now," Cade said as morning light filtered through the trees, studying their surroundings carefully, before allowing himself to relax even slightly. "But we should find a new location, further from where they last picked up our trail. Somewhere we can regroup and plan our next move properly." Arya nodded, exhaustion weighing heavily on her but her resolve unshaken. Whatever secrets Cade continued to guard, whatever danger still followed them through the wilderness, she found herself unwilling to abandon him now, not after everything they had already survived together. As they prepared to move once more, She caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. Something between gratitude and quiet, growing affection. "Thank you for staying," he said softly. "Despite everything, despite the danger and the questions I still can't answer. I know I haven't given you many reasons to trust me completely, but I promise, that trust means more to me than you realize." Arya held his gaze for a long moment, the rain-soaked forest around them slowly brightening with the arrival of full morning, and felt something settle warmly in her chest, despite the uncertainty still surrounding them both. "Just don't make me regret it," she said quietly, and together they set off once more into the misty forest, unaware of how quickly the fragile peace between them was about to be tested by the truth still waiting to be revealed. The new shelter they found that morning sat higher on the ridge, tucked behind a curtain of thick vines that provided both cover and a clear view of the valley below. Cade insisted on this vantage point, explaining that being able to see danger approaching mattered as much as staying hidden from it. "Whoever taught you to think this way clearly trained you well," Arya said, watching him assess the surrounding terrain with the same careful precision he had shown from the very beginning of his recovery. "I had good teachers," Cade replied simply, offering no further explanation, though the faraway look in his eyes suggested the memory carried more weight than his casual tone let on. They settled into a routine over the following days, one built on mutual respect and a partnership that had grown stronger through shared danger. Arya continued to hunt each morning, while Cade, his strength almost fully restored now, took on the responsibility of scouting their surroundings and identifying potential threats before they became emergencies. The division of labor felt natural, unforced, each of them contributing according to their strengths, without ever needing to discuss it explicitly. In the quiet hours between tasks, their conversations grew deeper, moving beyond survival strategy into more personal territory. Arya found herself sharing memories she had not spoken of in years, small moments from her childhood that had nothing to do with her exile or her training as heir, simply happy fragments of a life that had once felt secure and certain. There was a lake near the pack house, she told him one afternoon, sitting on a flat rock overlooking the valley, while sunlight filtered warm through the canopy above them. "My friends and I used to swim there every summer, even though the water was always freezing until at least midsummer. I remember one year, Callan bet me I couldn't swim across before he counted to 50. I made it in 30. Cade laughed, a genuine warm sound that had become increasingly familiar to her over their days together. "You strike me as someone who rarely loses a challenge," he said, amusement dancing in his amber eyes. "Rarely," Arya agreed, a small proud smile touching her lips. "Though I suppose losing my title and my home counts as one significant loss I never saw coming." The lightness faded slightly from her expression, and Cade reached over, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture that had become increasingly natural between them, despite the careful boundaries they had both maintained since his recovery. "You'll reclaim what was taken from you," he said quietly, conviction evident in his voice. "I believe that, whoever framed you, whatever lies convinced your pack to turn against you, the truth has a way of surfacing eventually. It simply takes time and the right circumstances." "You sound very certain of that," Arya said, studying him curiously. "Speaking from experience, perhaps." Something flickered across Cade's expression, brief but noticeable, before he offered a small, careful smile. "Let's just say I've learned that betrayal, however devastating in the moment, rarely stays buried forever. The people responsible eventually reveal themselves, one way or another." Arya wanted to press further, wanted to understand the personal history clearly informing his words, but she had learned by now that pushing too hard only made Cade retreat further behind his careful walls. Instead, she let the moment settle into comfortable silence, content simply to sit beside him as the afternoon sun warmed the ridge around them. That evening, as they prepared a small meal over their carefully contained fire, Cade turned the conversation toward practical matters, his tone shifting into the strategic focus that had become familiar whenever he considered their situation seriously. "We should discuss what comes next," he said, settling across from her with the quiet authority that still occasionally made her wonder exactly what kind of life he had led before their paths crossed. "You mentioned wanting to find whoever framed you and clear your name. I want to help you do that." Arya looked up in surprise. You don't need to get involved in my problems, Cade. You have your own enemies to deal with. Our problems might be more connected than you realize, Cade said carefully. Someone powerful enough to orchestrate a false accusation against Aluna, someone with the resources and influence to forge official seals and manufacture believable evidence. That kind of person often has connections across multiple territories. It's possible, even likely, that whoever framed you and whoever ordered the attack against me are operating within the same web of ambition and corruption. Arya considered this, turning the possibility over in her mind. You think there's a connection? I think it's worth investigating, Cade said. And I think, together, we stand a much better chance of uncovering the truth than either of us would alone. You know the internal politics of the Silver Moon Pack. I have knowledge and resources from my own territory that might help us identify who's truly behind all of this. Something in his careful phrasing caught Arya's attention. Resources, she repeated slowly. Cade, what exactly is your position within your pack? You keep mentioning knowledge and resources, like you have significant influence, but you've never actually told me anything concrete about who you really are. Cade's expression grew guarded again, the familiar retreat she had come to recognize whenever their conversation drew too close to the truth he continued to withhold. I told you I would explain everything, eventually, he said quietly. I meant that. But the timing has to be right. Some truths, once revealed, change everything, and I need to be certain you're ready for that change before I risk it. Ready for what exactly? Arya pressed, frustration and curiosity warring within her. Cade, I've trusted you with my safety, my secrets, my entire fragile existence out here in the wilderness. Whatever you're hiding, don't you think I deserve to know? Cade was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the firelight, clearly weighing the risk of revelation against the growing tension her persistent questions were creating between them. Finally, he let out a slow breath, something resigned settling into his expression. Soon, he said quietly. I promise you, soon. Just give me a little more time to be certain the danger has passed enough, that revealing the truth won't put you at even greater risk than you already face. Arya studied him for a long moment, torn between her frustration at his continued secrecy and the genuine sincerity evident in his eyes. Whatever he was hiding, she sensed it carried significant weight, significant enough that he feared how the revelation might change things between them. All right, she said finally, though the word carried a note of reluctant acceptance rather than full satisfaction. Soon. But Cade, whatever it is, whatever truth you're protecting me from, I hope you understand that after everything we've already survived together, very little could change how I see you now. Something raw and vulnerable passed across his features at her words, and for a moment, Arya thought he might finally reveal whatever secret weighed so heavily on him. Instead, he simply reached across the small distance between them and took her hand gently in his. I hope you're right, he said quietly, his voice rough with an emotion she could not quite name. I truly hope you're right. They sat together in comfortable silence as the fire slowly burned down, the tension of the conversation gradually easing into something softer, something that felt increasingly like the quiet intimacy shared between two people who had grown to genuinely care for one another, regardless of the secret still standing between them. As the days continued to pass, their bond deepened further, built on shared meals, shared watches through the night, shared laughter during rare peaceful moments, when the looming danger of Cade's unknown enemies felt momentarily distant. Arya found herself, despite every hard lesson learned from her exile, falling steadily and unmistakably for the mysterious man who had once been nothing more than a wounded wolf, collapsed in a rain-soaked ditch. She did not yet know his true name, his true position, the true scope of the danger surrounding them both, but she knew the steady warmth of his presence, the quiet strength of his protection, the genuine care evident in every small gesture he offered her throughout their days together in the wilderness. Whatever truth waited to be revealed, whatever changes it might bring to the fragile world they had built together, Arya found herself increasingly certain of one thing. She was no longer simply protecting a stranger out of stubborn compassion. She had begun, slowly and against every wall she had built since her exile, to fall in love with him. And somewhere beyond the safety of their hidden ridge, forces neither of them fully understood were already moving, pulling them both toward a confrontation that would finally reveal the truth Cade had been so carefully guarding, and test the fragile trust they had built together, against the harshest realities of power, betrayal, and the dangerous games played by those who ruled over the wolf world's most powerful territories. 2 days later, while gathering water from a nearby stream, Arya caught sight of something that made her pause mid-step. A patrol, 3 wolves in human form, moved along the ridgeline across the valley, wearing dark cloaks marked with an emblem she did not recognize, a silver ash tree, stitched carefully into the fabric near the collar. They moved with disciplined precision, clearly trained warriors rather than random rogue wolves, scanning the terrain with methodical thoroughness. She hurried back to their shelter, breathless with urgency, and found Cade sharpening a makeshift spear he had fashioned from a sturdy branch. "There are wolves across the valley," she said quickly, 3 of them, wearing cloaks with some kind of tree emblem. "They're searching the ridgeline systematically." Cade's entire body went rigid at her description, and for a moment, something flashed across his face that looked almost like relief, mixed with dread. "Ashwood colors," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "You recognize them," Arya said, watching him carefully. "Cade, are they friend or enemy?" He hesitated, clearly torn about how much to reveal, before finally answering. "They're not the ones who attacked me," he said slowly. "If anything, they might be searching for me for entirely different reasons, but approaching them carries risk regardless, until I understand exactly what's happening within my territory since my disappearance." "Your territory," Arya repeated, the phrase catching in her mind. "Cade, you keep referring to Ashwood as though you have real authority there, not just casual membership. Please, just tell me the truth. Whatever it is, I can handle it." Cade set down the spear slowly, meeting her gaze with an expression that finally seemed ready to yield to her persistent questions. "Arya," he said quietly, "there's something important I need to tell you about who I really am, and I think, given what you just described, the time to explain has finally arrived." Her heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness as she waited for him to continue, sensing that whatever truth he was about to reveal would fundamentally change the fragile, careful world they had built together over the past weeks. "Before I say anything else," Cade continued, his voice steady, despite the visible tension in his shoulders, "I need you to know that everything between us, every moment we've shared, every bit of trust we've built, none of it was a lie. Whatever title I hold, whatever position I occupy, it doesn't change who I actually am when I'm simply here with you." "Cade," Arya said softly, reaching out to take his hand, steadying herself as much as reassuring him, "just tell me." He took a deep breath, his amber eyes holding hers with unwavering intensity. "My full name is Calen Thorne," he said quietly. "I am the Alpha King of the Ashwood territories." The words hung in the air between them, and Arya felt the ground shift beneath her, understanding crashing over her in waves, as pieces of the past weeks suddenly clicked into place. The strategic thinking, the command presence, the enemies determined enough to send organized hunting parties after him, the disciplined patrol wearing his territory's emblem, searching for their missing leader. It all made sudden, undeniable sense. She had been protecting, feeding, and falling in love with the most powerful and feared Alpha King in the entire northern wolf territories, a leader whose name alone struck fear into rival packs, and he had let her believe, for weeks, that he was simply an ordinary wolf named Cade. "You're the Alpha King," she repeated slowly, her voice carefully controlled despite the storm of emotions building inside her. "The same Alpha King rumored to have no mercy, no weaknesses, the leader every other pack fears crossing. That reputation is often exaggerated," Calen said carefully, watching her expression with visible concern. "But yes, I am the Alpha King of Ashwood." Arya pulled her hand back slowly, processing the enormity of what he had just revealed, the weeks of careful, guarded half-truths he had offered, instead of the full story she deserved. "You let me believe you were simply Cade," she said, her voice quiet, but sharp with the beginning of genuine hurt. "For weeks, even after you regained your strength, even after we grew close, you let me believe a lie." "I never lied to you about who I was as a person," Calen said, urgency entering his voice as he recognized the pain in her expression. "Everything we shared, every conversation, every moment of trust, that was real. I simply withheld my title because I needed to be certain the danger surrounding me had passed, and because, honestly, I wanted to know you trusted me for who I actually was, not for the power my title carries. That wasn't your decision to make for me, Arya said, standing abruptly, putting distance between them as she struggled to reconcile the weeks of quiet intimacy with this sudden, overwhelming revelation. I told you things, Kaelin, real, private things about my life, my pain, my hopes. I deserved to know exactly who I was sharing all of that with. Kaelin rose as well, though he made no move to close the distance she had created, respecting the boundary, even as his expression revealed genuine remorse. You're right, he said quietly. You deserved honesty from the very beginning. I let fear and caution outweigh what was fair to you, and I'm truly sorry for that. Arya stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing through the implications of his revelation, the danger surrounding him, the power he actually possessed, the reasons someone might want an Alpha King dead badly enough to send assassins after him. And beneath all of it, a quieter, more painful realization settled heavily in her chest. She had fallen in love with a man whose true identity she had never truly known. I need a moment, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt inside, and she turned away, walking a short distance from their shelter, to sit alone at the edge of the ridge, staring out over the valley, as she tried to process everything that had just changed between them, in the span of a few devastating minutes. Behind her, Kaelin remained where he stood, watching her with quiet, patient sorrow, understanding that whatever trust they had built together now hung in a delicate, uncertain balance, one that only time and continued honesty could hope to repair. Arya sat at the edge of the ridge for a long time, watching the sun sink lower over the valley, her thoughts tangled in a complicated knot of hurt, understanding, and something else she was reluctant to name just yet. Behind her, she could hear Kaelin moving quietly around their shelter, giving her the space she needed without abandoning her entirely, a small consideration that softened her anger even as her hurt lingered. She thought about everything he had told her over the past weeks, every shared story, every moment of comfort offered during her darkest nights of exile. None of it felt like deception now that she considered it carefully. He had never claimed to be someone he was not. He had simply omitted the full truth of his position, protecting himself, and, in his own way, attempting to protect her as well from the dangerous complications that came with his true identity. Still, the hurt remained. She had shared her deepest vulnerabilities with a man she barely knew, at least not in the ways that mattered most. The revelation forced her to reconsider everything, to wonder how much of their connection had been built on a foundation she now understood only partially. As darkness settled fully over the ridge, Arya finally rose and made her way back toward their shelter, finding Kaelin sitting near their small fire, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes tracked her every movement with obvious concern. I'm not going to pretend I'm not still processing this, she said, settling across from him, keeping a careful distance despite the pull she still felt toward him. But I understand, at least partially, why you were cautious. Someone tried to kill you. You didn't know if I could be trusted with the truth of your identity. That's part of it, Kaelin admitted quietly. But if I'm being completely honest with you, and I think I owe you nothing less at this point, part of my hesitation came from something more personal. What do you mean? Arya asked, studying his face carefully in the flickering firelight. Kaelin was quiet for a moment, choosing his words with obvious care. Every relationship I've had since becoming Alpha King has been shaped by my title, he said slowly. People treat me differently once they know who I am. They become cautious, calculating, always aware of what they might gain or lose, depending on how they interact with me. Even wolves within my own pack, wolves I considered friends, often let ambition color their loyalty. He paused, his eyes finding hers with quiet intensity. With you, for the first time and longer than I can remember, I experienced genuine connection, built on nothing but who I actually am as a person. You cared for me when I was simply an injured wolf with nothing to offer you. You shared your pain with someone you believed was equally powerless. I was afraid, honestly afraid, that revealing my title would change that you would suddenly see the Alpha King instead of simply Cade. Arya felt something in her chest soften slightly at his admission, understanding the vulnerability behind his careful secrecy in a way she had not fully appreciated before. I understand that fear, she said quietly. More than you might realize. Before my exile, everyone valued me as the future Alpha, not as myself. When that title was stripped away, I wondered if anyone had ever cared about who I actually was underneath it. I did, Kalen said immediately, his voice firm with conviction. I do. From the very beginning, long before I even considered revealing my title, I cared about you. Your strength, your compassion, your stubborn refusal to abandon a stranger in need, despite everything you had already lost. None of that changes with the revelation of my identity. If anything, it only makes me more certain of how genuinely I feel about you. The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability he had rarely shown throughout their weeks together, chipped steadily away at the wall of hurt Arya had constructed since his revelation. She studied him for a long moment, weighing her lingering frustration against the genuine understanding growing between them. I still wish you had trusted me sooner, she said finally, but I understand why you didn't. And for what it's worth, knowing your title doesn't change how I feel about you either. I fell for Cade, the man who tended his own wounds while I hunted for food, who helped strategize our survival, who listened to my pain without judgment. Learning that Cade is also Kalen Thorne, Alpha King of Ashwood, doesn't erase any of that. Relief washed visibly over Kalen's features, and he reached across the small distance between them, offering his hand carefully, giving her the choice of whether to accept it. Arya hesitated only a moment before taking it, feeling the familiar warmth of his touch settle something anxious in her chest. Thank you, Kalen said quietly, for giving me the chance to explain, and for not walking away despite every reason you might have had to do so. We're not finished discussing this, Arya said, though her tone had lost its earlier sharpness. I still want to understand everything, your enemies, your territory, why someone wanted you dead badly enough to nearly succeed, but I'm willing to listen now, rather than simply reacting to the shock of the revelation. Kalen nodded, gratitude evident in his expression, and began explaining the situation more fully than he had allowed himself to before. He told her about the growing tension within certain factions of his own pack, wolves who resented his strict enforcement of territorial boundaries, who believed a more aggressive expansion policy would better serve their interests, even at the cost of destabilizing relationships with neighboring packs. I've made enemies through my leadership decisions, he explained. Necessary decisions in my judgment, but ones that cost certain ambitious wolves within my own ranks opportunities they desperately wanted. I believe the attack against me was orchestrated by someone within that faction, someone with enough resources and connections to arrange an ambush disguised as a random territorial conflict. Do you have any specific suspicions? Arya asked, leaning forward with genuine interest, recognizing echoes of her own situation within his story. A few, Kalen admitted, but nothing concrete enough to act on yet. That's part of why I've been cautious about returning to my territory too quickly. If my suspicions are correct, whoever orchestrated the attack likely has allies watching for any sign of my survival, ready to finish what they started before I can properly investigate and expose them. Arya considered this carefully, her mind already working through the strategic implications, the way her training as heir had once taught her to do. The patrol I saw today, she said slowly, wearing your territory's colors. If your suspicions are correct, could they be connected to whoever attacked you? Possibly, Kalen said, his expression darkening with the possibility. Or they could simply be loyal warriors, searching for their missing Alpha King, unaware of any internal conspiracy. Without more information, I can't be certain which explanation is accurate, and approaching them carries risk either way. They spent the following hour discussing possible strategies, weighing the risks of revealing Kalen's survival against the benefits of gathering more information about the current situation within his territory. Arya found herself falling naturally into the collaborative dynamic they had built over their weeks together, her strategic mind working seamlessly alongside his, in a way that felt, despite the seriousness of their discussion, deeply satisfying. You're remarkably good at this, Kalen observed at one point, watching her work through various scenarios with careful, methodical precision. Your training as heir clearly gave you skills far beyond simple combat. I was trained to lead, Arya said simply, though a hint of pride colored her voice at the acknowledgement. Even if that training was ultimately taken from me before I ever had the chance to use it properly. It wasn't wasted, Kalen said quietly, meeting her eyes with quiet sincerity. Watching you these past weeks, I've seen genuine leadership, Arya. The way you've survived, adapted, cared for others even while carrying your own pain. That's the mark of someone born to lead, regardless of whether a pack council formally recognizes it. Arya felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, a warmth that had nothing to do with their nearby fire. "Careful," she said, a small smile finally breaking through her earlier tension. "You're starting to sound like you actually believe in me." "I do believe in you," Kalen said, his voice quiet but absolutely certain. "More than you probably realize." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them had fully acknowledged despite the growing intimacy of their weeks together, and Arya found herself leaning slightly closer, drawn by the warmth in his eyes, the quiet sincerity in his voice, the steady strength that had carried them both through so much danger and uncertainty. Kalen reached up slowly, brushing a strand of hair back from her face, his touch gentle and careful, despite the obvious strength contained within him. "Arya," he said softly, "whatever happens next, whatever danger still waits for us, I need you to know that finding you in that storm was the single most fortunate moment of my entire life. Even though I dragged you through mud and made you eat raw rabbit for a week," Arya asked, a teasing lightness entering her voice, despite the emotional weight of the moment. Kalen laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine. "Even then," he confirmed. "Especially then, actually. Watching you fight so fiercely to save a stranger's life, refusing to give up even when the odds seemed impossible, that told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person you are." They sat together as the fire burned lower, the tension of the day's revelation gradually transforming into something softer, something that felt increasingly like the beginning of a genuine partnership, built on honesty, rather than convenient half-truths. Arya knew significant challenges still waited for them both. Enemies still hunted them through the wilderness, and the truth behind both her exile and Kalen's attempted assassination remained frustratingly unclear. But sitting beside him in the quiet darkness, his hand still resting gently against her cheek, she felt something she had not experienced since the night of her banishment. She felt, despite everything, genuinely hopeful about what might come next. As the night deepened around them, neither of them could have predicted just how quickly that fragile hope was about to be tested, or how the enemies hunting them both were already drawing closer, guided by information neither of them yet realized had been leaked. The next morning arrived clear and bright, sunlight breaking through the canopy in golden shafts that painted the forest floor in warm, dappled patterns. Arya woke feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The emotional weight of the previous day's revelations settled into something manageable, even comforting, now that honesty had finally taken root between herself and Kalen. She found him already awake, sitting near the edge of their shelter, sharpening his makeshift spear with methodical focus. He looked up as she approached, offering a warm smile that reached his amber eyes in a way that made her chest flutter pleasantly. "Good morning," he said, setting the spear aside. "I was hoping we might discuss our next steps today. I think it's time I consider making contact with my territory, carefully and cautiously, to determine exactly what has happened since my disappearance." Arya settled beside him, nodding thoughtfully. "How do you plan to do that without exposing yourself to whoever orchestrated the attack against you?" "I have a few trusted allies," Kalen explained, "wolves whose loyalty I've never had reason to doubt, even considering everything that's happened. My beta, Elias, has served beside me since before I claimed the Alpha King title. If anyone within my territory remains genuinely loyal, uncorrupted by whatever conspiracy nearly cost me my life, it would be him." "How would you contact him safely?" Arya asked. "If your enemies are watching for any sign of your survival, reaching out directly seems dangerous." Kalen considered this carefully. "There's a signal, a specific method of communication we established years ago for emergencies exactly like this. It involves marking a particular tree near the border of my territory in a way that only Elias would recognize as coming specifically from me. If I can reach that location safely, I can arrange a private meeting without alerting anyone else to my survival." "That still requires traveling closer to your territory," Arya pointed out, concern evident in her voice. "Closer to wherever your enemies might be watching." "It does," Kalen admitted, "which is why I want your input on how best to approach this safely. Your strategic thinking has already proven valuable, and honestly, I trust your judgment as much as my own at this point." Arya felt a flush of pride at his confidence in her, and together they spent the following hours mapping out a careful plan, discussing potential routes, timing, and contingencies should their approach draw unwanted attention. The collaborative planning felt natural, energizing even, reminding Arya of the strategic sessions she used to lead during her training as heir, when she had genuinely believed her future would involve leading her own pack through exactly this kind of careful, thoughtful decision-making. "You know," she said at one point, pausing their discussion to study Kaelin's focused expression, "watching you plan like this, I keep thinking about how different our lives might have looked if we'd met under other circumstances. Two pack leaders, working together as allies rather than as an exiled Luna and a hidden Alpha King hiding from assassins." Kaelin looked up, something thoughtful passing behind his eyes. "Perhaps that's still possible," he said quietly. "Once we've navigated our current dangers, once your name is cleared and my territory is secured against whatever conspiracy threatens it, perhaps there's still a future where we work together as genuine equals, without the shadow of exile or hidden identity standing between us." The hopeful possibility in his words settled warmly in Arya's chest, and she found herself imagining, despite every reason for caution, a future where the fragile connection they had built together in the wilderness might grow into something lasting, something built on the foundation of genuine partnership and mutual respect they had already demonstrated through weeks of shared survival. "I'd like that," she admitted quietly. "More than I probably should, given everything still standing in our way." Kaelin reached over, taking her hand gently in his thumb tracing soft circles against her palm. "Then let's make sure we survive long enough to find out," he said, a determined warmth coloring his voice. They spent the remainder of the day finalizing their plan, gathering additional supplies for the journey toward the border of Kaelin's territory, and resting as much as possible in preparation for the careful, dangerous approach they would attempt the following day. As evening settled over their ridge, they shared a quiet meal together, the earlier tension of Kaelin's revelation fully transformed into something warmer, more settled, a partnership strengthened, rather than weakened, by the honesty finally established between them. "Tell me about your territory," Arya said, curiosity genuine, as she considered the world Kaelin had left behind. "What is Ashwood like?" Kaelin's expression softened with obvious affection as he described his homeland, the dense ancient forests that gave his territory its name, the strong sense of community among his pack, despite the internal tensions currently threatening its stability, the mountain ranges marking its northern border, where he had spent countless hours as a young wolf, learning to hunt and track under his father's careful guidance. "My father was Alpha King before me," he explained, a hint of grief passing briefly across his features. "He died defending our territory from a rival pack's incursion nearly 5 years ago. I inherited the title far younger than I expected to, and I've spent every day since trying to prove myself worthy of the responsibility he left behind." "I'm sorry," Arya said softly, understanding the particular weight of that kind of loss and responsibility all too well. "It sounds like you've carried a great deal, especially for someone so young, to inherit such significant leadership." "Some days feel heavier than others," Kaelin admitted, "but hearing about your own training, your own dedication to eventually leading the Silver Moon Pack, I recognize a kindred understanding in you. We both know what it means to carry the weight of leadership, to make difficult decisions that not everyone will agree with, to face betrayal from those we should have been able to trust completely." Arya nodded, the shared understanding between them deepening further with every conversation, every revealed piece of their respective histories. "Perhaps that's part of why we understand each other so well," she said thoughtfully. "Despite everything different about our circumstances, our territories, our specific challenges, we share the same fundamental experience of carrying responsibility that others cannot fully appreciate." "I've never spoken this openly with anyone about the weight of my title," Kaelin admitted quietly. "Not even Elias, despite his years of loyal service. There's something about you, Arya, that makes honesty feel not just possible, but necessary." The sincerity in his words touched something deep within her, and Arya found herself leaning closer, the space between them narrowing, as the pull of genuine connection overcame the last remnants of caution she had maintained since his revelation. Kaelin's eyes searched hers, silently asking permission, and when she offered the smallest nod of encouragement, he closed the remaining distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that felt like the natural culmination of everything they had built together over their weeks in the wilderness. The kiss was gentle at first, careful, as though he feared she might pull away, but when she responded with equal warmth, wrapping her arms around his neck, the careful hesitation melted into something deeper, more certain, a physical expression of the trust and affection that had grown steadily between them, despite every obstacle standing in their path. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Kalen rested his forehead gently against hers, a soft smile touching his lips. "I've wanted to do that for longer than I probably should admit," he murmured. "Me too," Arya admitted, a genuine, unguarded smile spreading across her own face, for the first time since her exile had begun. "Even before I knew who you really were." They remained close together as the stars began emerging overhead, the quiet intimacy of the moment, a stark contrast to the danger still lurking somewhere beyond their protected ridge. But for now, wrapped in the warmth of newfound honesty and genuine affection, both of them allowed themselves a rare moment of uncomplicated happiness, unaware of how precious and fleeting that peace was about to become. Morning arrived too quickly, the golden warmth of the previous evening giving way to the sharper focus required for the dangerous journey ahead. Arya woke to find Kalen already preparing their supplies, his expression once again carrying the serious, strategic weight of a leader, preparing to face significant risk. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her rise. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, accepting his hand and allowing herself one brief moment to simply enjoy the warmth of his touch, before shifting fully into the focused mindset the day ahead demanded. They reviewed their plan one final time, confirming the route they would take toward the border of Ashwood territory, the signal Kalen intended to leave for his beta, and the fallback positions they would retreat to should anything go wrong. Arya felt a familiar nervous energy settling into her chest, the same focused readiness she used to feel before sparring matches during her training, heightened now by the genuine danger their journey represented. "Whatever happens today," Kalen said quietly, pausing before they set off, "I want you to know that having you beside me, as a partner rather than simply someone I owe a debt to, means more than I can properly express." "We're in this together now," Arya said firmly, meeting his gaze with steady determination. "Whatever comes next." Kalen nodded, a mixture of gratitude and quiet resolve passing across his features, and together they set off from their ridge, descending into the forest below, moving carefully and deliberately toward the border of the territory Kalen had left behind weeks earlier, as a wounded, dying wolf, and now approached again, as a king determined to reclaim what was rightfully his, with the woman he had come to love, steady and unwavering by his side. Neither of them could have known how quickly their careful plan was about to collide with dangers far greater than either had anticipated, as the true depth of the conspiracy against Kalen's throne, and the surprising connection to Arya's own exile, waited just beyond the tree line ahead. The journey toward the border of Ashwood territory took the better part of 2 days, Kalen leading them through terrain he clearly knew well despite the weeks that had passed since his ambush. Memories of childhood hunting trips and border patrols guiding his careful navigation through the dense forest. As they drew closer to familiar ground, Arya noticed a subtle shift in Kalen's demeanor, a heightened alertness, combined with something that looked almost like homesickness, the quiet longing of someone returning to a place they loved, after being forcibly separated from it by violence and betrayal. "It's strange," he admitted, during a brief rest, staring out toward the distant tree line that marked the edge of his territory. "I've spent weeks assuming I might never see this place again, and now that we're finally close, I find myself almost afraid of what we might discover." "Whatever we find, we'll face it together," Arya said, resting a reassuring hand on his arm. He covered her hand with his own, gratitude evident in his expression. "I know. That's the only reason I feel capable of continuing forward at all." They reached the marked tree just as evening began settling over the forest, a massive, ancient oak standing at the edge of a small clearing near the border. Kalen approached it carefully, running his fingers along the bark until he found a particular knot in the wood, barely visible unless someone knew exactly where to look. "This is the spot," he murmured, retrieving a small blade from his belt and carefully carving a specific symbol into the bark beside the knot. A series of interconnected circles that Arya recognized as some kind of private code. "Elias checks this location every few days when I'm away from the territory for extended periods. If he's still loyal, and if he's still checking, he should find this within a day or two." "And if he's not still loyal?" Arya asked carefully. voicing the concern they had both been avoiding. Kalen's jaw tightened slightly. Then we'll know soon enough, one way or another. They retreated to a hidden position nearby, close enough to observe the marked tree, without being easily spotted themselves, and settled in to wait. The following hours passed slowly, tension building steadily as they took turns keeping watch, alert for any sign of movement near the clearing. It was well into the second day of waiting when Arya's sharp senses finally caught the scent of an approaching wolf, moving cautiously through the forest toward the marked oak tree. She nudged Kalen awake from his brief rest, and together they watched, tense and ready, as a lone figure emerged into the clearing. He was tall, with sandy-colored hair and sharp, watchful eyes that scanned the surrounding forest with practiced caution before approaching the tree. When he spotted the freshly carved symbol, his entire posture shifted, relief and disbelief warring across his features. "That's Elias," Kalen breathed, quiet excitement entering his voice for the first time since their journey began. "He's alone. That's a good sign." They emerged carefully from their hidden position, and Elias spun immediately at the sound of movement, his stance shifting into a defensive posture before recognition dawned across his face. "Kalen," he breathed, disbelief evident in every syllable. "You're alive. We searched everywhere. When you didn't return from the border patrol, when we found signs of a struggle but no trace of you, we assumed the worst." "I nearly was the worst," Kalen said grimly, closing the distance between them, and clasping his beta's forearm in a gesture of genuine, relieved greeting. "I owe my survival entirely to this woman, Arya Voss, formerly of the Silver Moon Pack." Elias turned to study Arya, with evident curiosity and gratitude. "Then you have my deepest thanks," he said sincerely, before his expression shifted back toward Kalen, urgency replacing relief. "Kalen, there's a great deal you need to know. Things have changed significantly within the territory since your disappearance." "Tell me everything," Kalen said, his tone shifting immediately into the focused authority Arya had come to recognize during their strategic discussions. Elias glanced around the clearing carefully, before continuing, clearly cautious about being overheard. "Corwin Ashby has been consolidating power in your absence," he said, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. "Claiming temporary authority as acting alpha, insisting your death was all but confirmed, given how long you'd been missing without contact. He's already begun making significant changes to territorial policy, changes that benefit certain expansion interests far more than they benefit the pack as a whole." Kalen's expression darkened considerably at this news. "Corwin," he repeated slowly, something clicking into place behind his eyes. "I should have suspected him from the beginning. He's always resented my more conservative approach to territorial expansion." "There's more," Elias continued grimly. "I've been investigating quietly, trying to determine who might be responsible for the attack against you, given how coordinated and well-planned it appeared. I found evidence suggesting Corwin has been in secret communication with several outside parties, including, disturbingly, contacts within rival packs, who might benefit significantly from your removal." "Rival packs," Arya said slowly, a chill of recognition running through her as pieces began aligning in her mind. "Elias, do you have any information about which specific packs Corwin has been communicating with?" Elias glanced at her, curious about her sudden focused interest, before answering. "The evidence I found points toward at least one contact within the Silver Moon Pack territory, someone with significant influence, given the sensitivity of the information being exchanged." Arya's heart pounded as the implications settled over her fully. "The Silver Moon Pack," she repeated, her voice tight with dawning realization. "Elias, do you have any names associated with that contact?" "Only a partial reference," Elias said, clearly noting the intensity of her reaction. "A signature marked simply with the initial V, alongside references to internal pack politics that suggested someone with genuine authority or close proximity to leadership. The initial V." Arya's mind raced through the possibilities, her own surname beginning with that exact letter, though she knew instinctively the signature could not refer to her own involvement. But if someone within her own pack had been communicating secretly with Corwin, coordinating against Kalen's throne, the timing aligned disturbingly well with her own exile, suggesting a conspiracy far more complex and far-reaching than either of them had initially suspected. "Kalen," she said slowly, turning to face him with dawning horror, What if my exile and your attempted assassination are connected? What if the same person orchestrated both, using my downfall to secure influence within my own pack, while simultaneously working to remove you from power in Ashwood? Kaelin's expression sharpened with focused intensity as he considered her theory. It would explain the timing, he said slowly. Your exile occurred just weeks before my ambush. If someone was working to destabilize both territories simultaneously, removing key leadership figures to create opportunities for their own advancement, the coordination would require exactly this kind of far-reaching conspiracy. Elias looked between them, clearly trying to piece together the full context of their conversation. You believe there's a connection between the Alpha's ambush and your exile? He asked Arya directly. I believe it's possible, Arya said grimly. Someone forged my seal, framed me for treason I never committed, and had me exiled from my own pack, under circumstances that conveniently removed me as a potential obstacle, just before Kaelin was nearly assassinated. If that same person has been coordinating with Corwin, working to seize power in both territories through calculated betrayal, we might be looking at a conspiracy that extends far beyond simple ambition within a single pack. The weight of this realization settled heavily over all three of them, the scope of the danger they faced expanding significantly beyond what any of them had initially understood. Whoever orchestrated this conspiracy possessed not only significant resources and influence, but the patience and cunning necessary to execute a plan spanning multiple territories and multiple targets. We need more concrete evidence, Kaelin said finally, his strategic mind already working through their next steps. Elias, can you continue investigating discreetly, without alerting Corwin to my survival? I need to understand the full scope of this conspiracy, before I can safely return and reclaim my throne. I'll do everything I can, Elias promised, solemnly. But Kaelin, you should know, Corwin has significantly strengthened his personal guard since claiming acting authority. If he learns you're alive before you're ready to confront him directly, the danger to you, and to Arya, will only increase substantially. We'll be careful, Kaelin said firmly, but we can't hide indefinitely. Corwin's expansion policies, whatever damage he's causing within the territory, and whatever role he might have played in Arya's exile, all of it needs to be exposed and addressed properly. As they continued discussing strategy, formulating a careful plan to gather additional evidence while avoiding detection, Arya felt a renewed sense of purpose settling over her, the vague uncertainty of her exile finally beginning to crystallize into something she could actively investigate and combat. Whoever had orchestrated the conspiracy against both her and Kaelin, whoever hid behind the signature initial V, would eventually be exposed. And when that day came, Arya intended to be standing right beside Kaelin, ready to reclaim everything that had been stolen from them both. Elias departed as evening deepened over the forest, promising to return within a few days with whatever additional information he could gather, careful to maintain his usual routine within the territory, to avoid raising Corwin's suspicions. Kaelin and Arya retreated to a more secluded position, deeper within the forest, choosing safety over proximity to the border, while they waited for Elias's next report. That night, sitting together beside their small fire, Arya found herself unable to fully settle, her mind still racing through the implications of everything they had learned. The signature, she said finally, breaking the contemplative silence between them. The initial V. I keep trying to think of who within my pack it might represent, but there are so many possibilities. Voss is my own family name, but there are other prominent bloodlines beginning with the same letter. Try not to torture yourself over it tonight, Kaelin said gently, reaching over to take her hand. Elias will gather more information. Once we have concrete evidence, we can narrow down the possibilities, with far more confidence than speculation alone can provide. I know, Arya said, though the frustration remained evident in her voice. It's just difficult, knowing someone I likely grew up around, someone I might have trusted, orchestrated so much suffering for both of us. Kaelin squeezed her hand gently, understanding the particular pain of betrayal from someone close, all too well given his own suspicions about Corwin. We'll find them, he said with quiet determination, and when we do, they'll answer for everything they've done, to both of our territories. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the weight of their shared purpose settling into something steadier, more resolved, before Arya finally spoke again, her tone shifting toward something lighter. needing a brief reprieve from the heaviness of their situation. "Tell me about Elias," she said. "How long have you known him?" Kalen's expression softened at the change in topic, clearly grateful for the momentary distraction as well. "Since childhood," he said. "His father served as beta to my own father, and we grew up training together, competing constantly to see who could best the other in combat drills. He's one of the few people I trust completely, someone who has never once shown interest in the power my title carries, only genuine loyalty to our territory and its people. He seems capable," Arya observed. "Steady, careful, the kind of ally worth having in dangerous circumstances." "He is," Kalen agreed. "I'm fortunate to have him, though I imagine, given everything you've told me about your own training and leadership abilities, you would have made an equally formidable beta or advisor, had circumstances allowed you to remain within your pack's leadership structure." Arya smiled slightly at the compliment, though a hint of old grief still colored the expression. "Perhaps in another life," she said quietly, "one where I never lost everything to a stranger's betrayal." "This life still holds possibility," Kalen said gently. "Once we expose whoever is truly responsible, once your name is cleared and my throne is secured, there's no reason you couldn't reclaim your rightful place within the Silver Moon Pack, or build an entirely new future alongside me here in Ashwood, should that path appeal to you more." The suggestion, delivered so casually yet carrying such significant weight, caught Arya slightly off guard. She studied Kalen's expression carefully, searching for any hint of uncertainty behind the offer, but found only genuine sincerity. "Are you asking me to consider a future in Ashwood?" she asked softly. "I'm asking you to consider a future with me," Kalen clarified, his voice steady, despite the vulnerability evident beneath his words. "Wherever that future ultimately leads us, whether within Ashwood, within the Silver Moon Pack, or somewhere else entirely, I've come to care for you deeply, Arya, far beyond simple gratitude for saving my life. Whatever path we choose moving forward, I want to walk it together with you, if you're willing." Arya felt her heart swell with emotion at his words, the genuine sincerity behind them settling any lingering doubt she might have harbored about the depth of his feelings. "I want that too," she said quietly, leaning into him as he wrapped a steady arm around her shoulders. "More than I ever expected to want anything again, after everything my exile took from me." They remained close together, as the fire slowly burned down, the weight of the conspiracy still looming over them both, but tempered now by the genuine comfort of shared purpose and deepening affection. Whatever dangers still waited for them, whatever difficult truths remained to be uncovered about the betrayal orchestrating both of their downfalls, they faced it now, as genuine partners, bound together not merely by circumstance, but by choice. As the following days passed slowly, while they waited for Elias's return, that partnership continued deepening, tested repeatedly by careful strategic planning, by shared vigilance against potential danger, and by the quiet, growing certainty that whatever they built together, in love and in purpose, was worth fighting, to protect against whoever sought to destroy them both. The attack came without warning, 3 days after Elias had departed to continue his investigation, shattering the fragile peace Arya and Kalen had built during their days of careful waiting. Arya woke suddenly in the pre-dawn darkness, every instinct screaming that something was wrong, before her conscious mind fully caught up with the danger. She reached instinctively for Kalen, finding him already awake beside her, his body tense and alert, his eyes fixed on the tree line surrounding their small camp. "Someone's here," he whispered, barely audible. "Multiple wolves, moving carefully, trying not to be detected. This isn't a routine patrol." Arya's pulse quickened as she rose silently, reaching for the sharpened blade she kept close at all times. "How many?" she whispered back. "At least 4, Kalen murmured, his nostrils flaring slightly as he scented the air. "Possibly more. And Arya, I don't recognize the scent pattern. These aren't Ashwood wolves." Before either of them could formulate a plan, a low growl echoed from the darkness surrounding their camp, followed immediately by the sound of movement closing in from multiple directions. Arya's training took over instantly, years of combat preparation overriding fear, as she positioned herself back-to-back with Kalen, both of them scanning the shadows for the first sign of their attackers. "Kalen Thorne," a voice called out from the darkness, cold and confident. We were beginning to wonder if you'd ever resurface. Your continued survival has become quite an inconvenience. Show yourself, Kalen called back, his voice carrying the sharp authority of command despite their vulnerable position. Or are you too cowardly to face me directly after your failed attempt at murder? A figure emerged from the shadows. A tall wolf shifted into human form, wearing dark leather armor marked with an unfamiliar emblem, flanked by 3 additional warriors, who spread out to surround the small clearing. His expression carried the cold calculation of a professional killer, rather than the passionate anger of personal vendetta. Nothing personal, Your Majesty, the lead attacker said, a humorless smile touching his lips. Simply business. Someone is willing to pay a great deal to ensure you never reclaim your throne. And your companion here, well, she seems to have made herself quite a valuable target as well, given her connections to certain sensitive information within the Silver Moon Pack. Arya's blood ran cold at the implication. What do you know about my exile? She demanded, gripping her blade tightly. The attacker's smile widened slightly. More than you might expect, but I'm afraid explanations aren't part of tonight's arrangement. Just efficient completion of the task we've been paid for. Without further warning, the 4 attackers converged simultaneously, and the clearing erupted into violent chaos. Kalen shifted instantly, his massive gray wolf form meeting the nearest attacker head-on, powerful jaws snapping as he defended their position with ferocious determination. Arya spun to meet a second attacker, her training guiding her movements as she deflected his initial strike, her blade finding purchase against his exposed forearm. The fight was brutal and fast, adrenaline sharpening every sense as Arya fought with everything her years of training had prepared her for. She ducked beneath a swinging blow, countered with a sharp jab of her elbow, and used the attacker's momentary disorientation to create distance, buying herself precious seconds to assess the wider battlefield. Kalen fought with devastating efficiency despite still carrying faint traces of weakness from his earlier injuries, his massive wolf form proving more than a match for his opponent's combat training. But as Arya watched, she saw a third attacker circling around toward Kalen's exposed flank, clearly intending to exploit the moment his attention remained fixed on his direct opponent. Kalen, behind you, she shouted, abandoning her own defensive position to intercept the flanking attacker before he could strike. Her warning gave Kalen just enough time to twist aside, narrowly avoiding what would have been a serious wound, while Arya engaged the flanking attacker directly, her blade meeting his in a shower of sparks as their weapons clashed in the darkness. The attacker was skilled, clearly well-trained, but Arya matched his every move with the precision of years spent training specifically for exactly this kind of combat. She caught an opening in his defense, driving her blade forward with controlled force, striking a glancing blow against his shoulder that forced him to stumble backward, clutching the wound with a hiss of pain. Before she could press her advantage further, the 4th attacker, whom she had lost track of during the chaotic exchange, appeared suddenly from her blind side. She sensed the danger a fraction of a second too late, spinning to defend herself as his blade sliced across her upper arm, pain flaring bright and immediate. She gritted her teeth against the sensation, refusing to let it slow her down, and countered with a fierce strike that forced him back several steps. Arya. Kalen's voice carried genuine alarm as he caught sight of her injury, momentarily distracted from his own opponent. I'm fine. Focus on your fight, she shouted back, forcing herself to maintain her defensive posture, despite the throbbing pain in her arm. The battle continued for several more tense minutes, both Arya and Kalen fighting with everything they possessed against attackers who, despite their clear skill and training, gradually began losing ground against the combined ferocity of an Alpha King fighting for his throne and an exiled Luna fighting for her stolen future. One by one, the attackers began retreating, recognizing the shifting tide of the battle against them. This isn't over, the lead attacker called out, backing away carefully while nursing his injured shoulder. You've simply delayed the inevitable, Your Majesty. Tell whoever sent you that I'll be reclaiming my throne regardless of how many assassins they send after me, Kalen called back, his voice carrying deadly promise. And when I find them, they'll regret ever believing they could remove me so easily. The attackers melted back into the darkness of the forest, leaving Kalen and Arya alone once more, both breathing hard from the exertion of battle, adrenaline still coursing through their systems. Kalen shifted back into human form immediately, rushing to Arya's side, his expression tight with concern, as he examined the wound along her arm. "Let me see," he said urgently, gently taking her arm to assess the damage more carefully. The cut was not deep, though it bled steadily, and Arya winced slightly as he probed the edges carefully to ensure nothing more serious remained hidden beneath the surface wound. "I'll be fine," she assured him, though the pain remained sharp and insistent. "It's not as bad as it looks." "You saved my life again tonight," Kaelin said quietly, guilt and gratitude warring across his features as he began tending her wound with careful, practiced movements, tearing a strip of fabric from his shirt to create a makeshift bandage. "If you hadn't warned me about that flanking attacker, I might not have survived this encounter." "We saved each other," Arya corrected gently, watching him work with focused concentration. "That's what partners do." Kaelin looked up at her words, something profound and grateful passing across his expression, before he leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, once the makeshift bandage was securely in place. "Partners," he repeated softly, the word carrying weight beyond simple acknowledgement. "I like the sound of that." Once her wound was properly tended, they assessed their situation carefully, both recognizing that the attack fundamentally changed their circumstances. Whoever had orchestrated the assault clearly knew significant details about both Kaelin's survival and Arya's connection to the Silver Moon Pack, information that should have remained carefully hidden, given the caution they had maintained throughout their weeks of hiding. "Someone leaked information about our location," Kaelin said grimly, his strategic mind already working through the implications. "Very few people knew we were waiting near this position. Elias, obviously, but I trust him completely. Which means either someone tracked us despite our precautions, or there's a security breach somewhere we haven't yet identified. The attacker mentioned my connections to sensitive information within the Silver Moon Pack," Arya said slowly, turning the disturbing detail over in her mind. "That suggests whoever hired them knows far more about my exile and its true circumstances than an outside observer reasonably should. Which supports our theory about a connected conspiracy," Kaelin said, nodding grimly. "Someone with knowledge and influence spanning both our territories, coordinating attacks against us both simultaneously. They spent the remainder of the night relocating to a new, more defensible position, unwilling to remain vulnerable at their previous camp, given the successful location of their hiding place by hostile forces. As dawn broke over the forest, exhausted but alert, they settled into their new shelter, both processing the reality that whatever conspiracy threatened them had grown significantly more dangerous and more determined than they had initially realized. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Kaelin said, as morning light filtered through their new hiding place. "Waiting passively for Elias to gather information puts us at continued risk. I think it's time we consider a more direct approach." "What are you thinking?" Arya asked, studying his determined expression carefully. "I think it's time I reveal my survival publicly, within my own territory, under carefully controlled circumstances that minimize risk while forcing Corwin's hand," Kaelin said slowly. "If he believes I'm dead, he continues consolidating power unchallenged. But if I return, publicly and with enough support to prevent him from simply eliminating me again, he'll be forced to either expose his true intentions or retreat from his current position. That's an enormous risk," Arya said carefully, though she recognized the strategic logic behind his suggestion. "It is," Kaelin agreed, "but continuing to hide only allows the conspiracy against us both to strengthen further. At some point, we need to confront this threat directly rather than simply reacting to their attacks." Arya considered his proposal carefully, weighing the danger against the potential benefits, before finally nodding with determined resolve. "Then let's plan this properly," she said. "If we're going to confront Corwin, and whoever he's working with, we need to do it with every advantage we can possibly secure." As they began outlining a new, more aggressive strategy, both of them recognized that the coming days would likely determine the ultimate outcome of everything they had fought for since their unlikely meeting in that storm-soaked ditch weeks earlier. The stakes had never been higher, the danger never more immediate, but neither of them wavered in their determination to see the conspiracy against them fully exposed, regardless of the risk required to accomplish it. Elias returned 2 days later, his expression grave as he approached their new hiding place. Clearly having heard about the attack through channels Arya did not fully understand. He embraced Kaelin briefly, before turning his attention to the details of what had happened. "I heard about the assault," he said grimly, News travels quickly among certain circles, even ones trying to remain hidden. I've intensified my investigation since then, and I believe I've found something significant. Tell us, Kalen said, urgency evident in his tone. Elias retrieved a folded piece of parchment from within his cloak, handling it carefully, as though it carried enormous weight. I managed to intercept a private communication meant for Corwin, he explained. It confirms his connection to outside forces working against you, and it includes a fuller signature than the partial reference I found previously. He unfolded the parchment carefully, revealing hastily scrawled handwriting, and pointed toward the bottom, where a signature had been carefully inscribed. Arya leaned forward, her heart pounding, as she read the name signed at the bottom of the letter. Vantrick Ashby. The name struck her with immediate, disorienting recognition. Vantrick Ashby, she repeated slowly, her mind racing to place the connection. That name, I know it. He served as a senior advisor within my mother's inner council, someone close enough to the throne to have access to official seals and sensitive pact communications. Ashby, Kalen repeated, his expression darkening with sudden understanding. Arya, that surname. It's the same as Corwin's. The realization crashed over Arya with devastating clarity. They're related, she breathed. Vantrick and Corwin. Cousins, perhaps, or more distant relations sharing the same bloodline. Kalen, this isn't simply two separate conspiracies happening to align. This is one coordinated family conspiracy, spanning both our territories. Elias nodded grimly, confirming her rapid deduction. I've traced the Ashby family influence across several territories, he said. They've been quietly building alliances and financial interests for years, always remaining just beneath the surface of formal power, positioning themselves carefully for exactly this kind of coordinated opportunity. Vantrick Ashby, Arya said again, anger building steadily in her voice, as pieces continued clicking into place. He would have had access to my seal. He would have understood pack politics well enough to craft a believable forgery. And with Corwin positioned to seize control of Ashwood, removing both of us simultaneously, would have cleared the path for their family to gain unprecedented influence across two significant territories. This is exactly the concrete evidence we needed, Kalen said, determination hardening his expression. Elias, can you gather any additional documentation connecting Vantrick directly to the forged evidence used against Arya? I'll do everything possible, Elias promised. Though given his position within the Silver Moon Pact's inner council, gathering evidence without alerting him to our investigation will require significant caution. They spent the following hours discussing strategy with renewed urgency, the confirmation of a coordinated Ashby family conspiracy, fundamentally strengthening their resolve to expose the truth publicly. Arya felt something shift within her as she absorbed the full scope of what had been done to her, the calculated cruelty of using her own trusted advisor to destroy her future so thoroughly. When this is over, she said quietly, once Elias had departed once more to continue his careful investigation, I want to be there when Vantrick faces justice for what he did. Not just for my own sake, but for my pack, who deserves to know the truth about who truly betrayed them. You will be, Kalen promised, his voice firm with conviction. And when we expose this conspiracy fully, both Corwin and Vantrick will answer for every consequence their ambition has caused. As evening settled over their hidden camp, Arya found herself studying the folded parchment Elias had left with them, Vantrick's signature staring back at her, as tangible proof of the betrayal that had shattered her life weeks earlier. The anger simmering within her felt different now than the helpless grief she had carried since her exile, transformed into something sharper, more purposeful, a determination to see justice properly served rather than simply survive the aftermath of injustice. We're close, Kalen said softly, watching her expression carefully. Closer than we've been since this entire ordeal began. Whatever comes next, whatever risks remain ahead of us, we're finally moving toward real answers, real accountability. Arya nodded, meeting his gaze with renewed resolve. Then, let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next, she said, because I intend to see this through to the very end, regardless of the danger still standing in our way. Together, they continued refining their plans through the remainder of the evening, both of them acutely aware that the confrontation ahead would likely prove more dangerous and more consequential than anything they had faced together thus far. But armed now with concrete evidence and a clear understanding of the conspiracy arrayed against them, They faced the coming challenge with steady, unwavering determination, ready to reclaim everything that had been stolen from them both. 3 days later, with additional evidence gathered by Elias confirming financial transactions between Vantrick and the assassins hired to eliminate Kalen, they finally felt prepared to move forward with their plan. Elias had arranged for a small group of trusted warriors, wolves whose loyalty to Kalen predated Corwin's rise to acting authority, to gather secretly near the territory's central meeting hall, ready to support Kalen's return the moment he revealed himself publicly. The night before their planned confrontation, Arya found herself unable to sleep, her mind cycling through every possible outcome, every risk still standing between them and justice. She left their shelter quietly, settling on a nearby rock outcropping to watch the stars, needing a moment of quiet reflection before the momentous events of the following day. Kalen found her there a short while later, settling beside her without a word, simply offering his presence as comfort against the weight of what waited ahead. "Are you frightened?" he asked eventually, his voice gentle in the quiet darkness. "Terrified," Arya admitted honestly. "Not just for myself, but for you. Corwin has had weeks to consolidate his position. If our plan fails, if he manages to turn the pack against you before the truth can be properly revealed, the consequences could be catastrophic." "I know," Kalen said quietly, "but staying hidden any longer only strengthens his position further. We have to act now, while we still hold the advantage of surprise and concrete evidence." Arya nodded, understanding the strategic necessity, even as anxiety continued churning within her. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said softly, "I need you to know how much these past weeks have meant to me. Finding you in that storm, everything we've built together since then, it's given me something I thought I'd lost forever after my exile. Hope, purpose, genuine connection with someone who sees me for exactly who I am." Kalen turned to face her fully, his expression soft with deep affection, despite the tension of the coming confrontation. "You've given me the same thing," he said quietly. "More than that, actually. You've reminded me what it means to trust completely, to build something real with someone who values me beyond my title or my position. Whatever happens tomorrow, however this confrontation unfolds, I want you to know that loving you has been the truest, most certain thing in my entire life." The declaration, spoken so openly and sincerely beneath the star-filled sky, settled warmly in Arya's chest, despite the fear still churning alongside it. "I love you too," she said softly, the words feeling both new and completely natural on her tongue. "Whatever comes tomorrow, we face it together." Kalen leaned forward, capturing her lips in a slow, tender kiss that spoke of everything words could not fully express, the culmination of weeks spent building trust and connection against impossible odds. When they finally parted, both of them found renewed strength in the certainty of their shared feelings, ready to face whatever challenges the following day might bring. They returned to their shelter shortly after, resting as much as anxious anticipation allowed, preparing themselves mentally and physically for the confrontation that would finally determine the fate of both their futures. Dawn arrived with a clarity that felt almost symbolic, golden light breaking cleanly through the forest canopy, as Arya and Kalen made their final preparations. Elias arrived shortly after sunrise, confirming that the trusted warriors he had gathered were in position, ready to support Kalen's dramatic return the moment it became necessary. "Are you certain about this plan?" Elias asked one final time, clearly concerned about the risks involved, despite his unwavering loyalty and support. "I'm certain," Kalen said firmly, meeting his beta's gaze with steady resolve. "It's time to reclaim what's rightfully mine, and to ensure Vantrick and Corwin finally answer for everything they've done." Together, the three of them set off toward the central meeting hall of Ashwood territory, moving with careful purpose through terrain that grew increasingly familiar to Kalen with every step. As they drew closer to the heart of his territory, Arya felt the weight of the coming confrontation settling heavily over her, the culmination of weeks of danger, discovery, and deepening love finally approaching its decisive moment. Whatever awaited them at that central meeting hall, whatever confrontation Corwin's response might provoke, Arya knew with absolute certainty that she would face it standing firmly beside Kalen, both of them ready to expose the truth and reclaim the futures that had been so cruelly stolen from them both. The central meeting hall of Ashwood territory stood at the heart of a bustling settlement, its towering wooden structure carved with generations of pack history, familiar to Kalen in ways that clearly stirred deep emotion as they approached. Warriors loyal to Elias had already positioned themselves discreetly around the perimeter, ready to intervene should the confrontation turn violent. Inside, Corwin Ashby stood at the head of the hall, addressing a gathered crowd of pack members with the confident authority of someone thoroughly convinced of his own permanent position. He was a lean man with calculating eyes and an easy, practiced smile that Arya immediately distrusted, recognizing in his mannerisms the same careful ambition that had likely characterized his cousin Vantrix's betrayal within her own pack. As acting alpha, Corwin was saying as they approached the hall's entrance, his voice carrying clearly through the open doorway, "I believe we must accept the difficult reality of our king's likely passing. It has been many weeks without any sign of his survival. Ashwood needs stable, decisive leadership moving forward, and I intend to provide exactly that." Kalen's jaw tightened at the calculated presumption in Corwin's words, and he exchanged a brief glance with Arya and Elias before stepping forward, his voice carrying clear and commanding across the assembled crowd. "I believe Ashwood already has a king," Kalen announced, striding into the hall with unmistakable authority, "and he has no intention of surrendering his throne to someone whose ambition clearly outweighs his loyalty." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as recognition dawned across dozens of faces, disbelief and relief mixing visibly among the pack members who had genuinely mourned their missing king. Corwin's carefully composed expression cracked momentarily, shock and something far more calculating flashing behind his eyes, before he recovered his composure. "Kalen," he said, forcing surprise and relief into his voice that did not quite reach his eyes. "This is remarkable news. We had feared the worst after so many weeks without contact." "I'm certain you did," Kalen said coldly, continuing forward, until he stood directly before Corwin, the assembled crowd watching with rapt, tense attention. "Though I suspect your fear had far more to do with my potential survival than my potential death." "I don't understand what you're implying," Corwin said, though the careful control in his voice suggested otherwise. "I think you understand perfectly well," Kalen replied, his voice hardening further. "I was ambushed near the border, weeks ago, left for dead by warriors who very nearly succeeded. I've spent the following weeks recovering and investigating exactly who orchestrated that attack. My investigation led me to some very troubling conclusions regarding your involvement and your connection to your cousin Vantrix Ashby." The mention of Vantrix's name sent a visible ripple of tension through Corwin's expression, though he quickly attempted to mask it with practiced denial. "I have no idea what you're referring to," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Whatever accusations you're making, they're entirely baseless." "Are they?" Arya said, stepping forward beside Kalen, unable to remain silent any longer, given her own personal stake in exposing the conspiracy. "Because I have significant reason to believe Vantrix Ashby orchestrated a false accusation against me within my own pack, using forged documents and manipulated evidence to secure my exile, and the timing of that exile aligns disturbingly well with your own sudden rise to power here in Ashwood." Murmurs of confusion and growing suspicion spread through the crowd as they processed this new information, clearly recognizing the serious implications of coordinated conspiracy spanning multiple territories. Corwin's composure finally began cracking fully under the mounting pressure of public scrutiny. "You have no proof of any of this," he snapped, though the defensive edge in his voice betrayed his growing panic. "Actually," Elias said, stepping forward and producing the folded parchment they had carried carefully throughout their journey, "we have quite substantial proof. Financial records connecting you directly to the payment of assassins hired to eliminate our king, correspondence between yourself and Vantrix discussing coordination of efforts across both territories, and testimony from Arya Voss regarding the false accusations that led to her unjust exile from the Silver Moon Pack." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, shock and outrage replacing their earlier confusion, as the full scope of Corwin's betrayal became increasingly clear. Corwin's eyes darted around the hall, clearly searching for some avenue of escape or defense, but finding none, as the assembled pack members' expressions shifted increasingly toward hostility and condemnation. "This is absurd," Corwin said, though his voice had lost nearly all its earlier confidence. "I've served this territory faithfully for years. You would trust the word of an exiled traitor over your own loyal advisor? I would trust concrete evidence over convenient denial," Kalen said coldly. And Arya is no traitor. She saved my life when I was left dying in the wilderness, nursed me back to health without knowing my true identity, and has fought alongside me ever since, to expose exactly the kind of conspiracy you and your cousin orchestrated against us both. Corwin's expression cycled through several emotions in quick succession: calculation, panic, and finally something approaching desperate resignation, as he recognized the impossibility of his position. "Whatever you believe you've proven," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You'll find the consequences of your accusations far more complicated than you currently anticipate." "Is that a threat?" Kalen asked, his voice deadly calm, despite the obvious tension radiating through his posture. "Simply an observation," Corwin said, though the malice in his eyes suggested otherwise. "You believe exposing me solves your problems, but the Ashby family's influence extends far beyond what you've uncovered here today. Removing me changes nothing about the larger ambitions already set into motion." "Then we'll address those ambitions as thoroughly as we've addressed yours," Kalen said firmly, "starting with your immediate removal from any position of authority within this territory." He turned to address the assembled crowd directly, his voice carrying clear authority that immediately commanded their full attention. "I am your rightful Alpha King, returned from what was meant to be my permanent removal from power. Corwin Ashby has been exposed as a conspirator against this territory's stability, working alongside his cousin to orchestrate my assassination and the unjust exile of an innocent Luna from a neighboring pack. By the authority vested in my position, I hereby strip Corwin Ashby of any claim to leadership within Ashwood territory, effective immediately." The crowd erupted into a mixture of shocked murmurs and growing approval, clearly relieved to see their true king returned, and simultaneously outraged by the depth of Corwin's betrayal. Several warriors, previously loyal to Kalen before his disappearance, moved forward to formally take Corwin into custody, ensuring he could not attempt any further schemes now that his conspiracy had been thoroughly exposed. As Corwin was led away, his expression twisted with barely restrained fury and humiliation. Kalen turned to Arya, relief and pride evident in his amber eyes despite the tension of everything they had just accomplished. "We did it," he said quietly, reaching for her hand. "One threat successfully addressed." "One threat," Arya agreed, though concern lingered in her expression. "But Corwin mentioned the Ashby family's ambitions, extending further than we've uncovered, and Vantrick remains free within the Silver Moon Pack, likely unaware his conspiracy here has just been exposed." "Then we'll address him next," Kalen said firmly, determination hardening his features. "But for tonight, let's allow ourselves a moment to properly celebrate reclaiming my throne, before we turn our full attention toward securing justice within your own pack as well." The assembled crowd, gradually processing the full scope of what had just transpired, began offering genuine, heartfelt welcome to their returned king. Warriors and pack members alike, expressing relief and gratitude that overwhelmed the earlier tension of Corwin's exposure. Arya watched Kalen accept this outpouring of loyalty and affection, with quiet grace, recognizing in his interactions the genuine care and respect he held for his people, the same qualities that had drawn her to him from the very beginning of their unlikely partnership. As the celebration continued into the evening, warriors and pack members sharing stories of relief and renewed hope for their territory's future, Arya found herself standing slightly apart, watching Kalen interact with his people with quiet pride and affection. He caught her eye across the crowded hall and made his way toward her, his expression softening as he approached. "You did this," he said quietly, once he had reached her side. "Your courage, your willingness to stand publicly and share your own testimony, that made all the difference in convincing the pack of Corwin's guilt." "We did this together," Arya corrected gently, echoing the sentiment that had become their shared understanding throughout the trials of the past weeks. "Just as we'll address Vantrick together, and finally secure justice for both our territories." Kalen nodded, pulling her close in a warm embrace amid the continuing celebration around them. "Whatever comes next," he murmured against her hair, "I'm grateful to face it with you beside me." As the evening progressed and the celebration continued honoring Kalen's return, both of them knew significant challenges still remained ahead. Vantrick's continued influence within the Silver Moon Pack, representing an unresolved threat that would require careful, strategic confrontation. But for tonight, surrounded by the genuine relief and joy of Kalen's reclaimed territory, They allowed themselves a brief, well-earned moment of celebration, before turning their full attention toward the final confrontation that awaited them within Arya's own pack. The following morning, after a night of celebration finally settled into quiet exhaustion throughout the territory, Kaelin called a private council meeting with his most trusted advisors, including Elias and several senior warriors who had remained loyal throughout his absence. Arya attended as well, invited by Kaelin despite her status as an outsider, a gesture that carried significant symbolic weight, given the formal traditions typically governing such gatherings. Corwin has been secured in the territory's detention chambers, Elias reported, his expression grim but satisfied. He's refused to answer further questions regarding the full scope of the conspiracy, though the evidence we've already gathered should prove sufficient for formal judgment before the Pack Council. Good, Kaelin said, nodding firmly. I want him held accountable through proper legal proceedings, ensuring the Pack fully understands the extent of his betrayal. But our priority now shifts toward addressing Vantryk's continued influence within the Silver Moon Pack. One of the senior warriors, an older woman named Nora who had served as a strategic advisor since Kaelin's father's reign, spoke up thoughtfully. Confronting Vantryk presents different challenges than addressing Corwin, she observed. You hold direct authority here in Ashwood, allowing you to strip Corwin's position immediately, but within the Silver Moon Pack, you have no formal standing, and Arya remains officially exiled, unable to challenge Vantryk's position directly without risking further complications. Arya nodded, recognizing the validity of Nora's concern. My mother, Selene, remains alpha of the Silver Moon Pack, she said. Any confrontation with Vantryk requires her cooperation, or at minimum, her willingness to properly investigate the evidence against him. Given how thoroughly he manipulated the situation that led to my exile, convincing her of his betrayal without overwhelming, undeniable proof may prove significantly difficult. Then we ensure we possess exactly that kind of undeniable proof before approaching her, Kaelin said firmly. Elias, can you continue gathering evidence connecting Vantryk to both the assassination attempt against me and the forged documents used against Arya? I'll do everything possible, Elias confirmed, though I suspect our best opportunity for concrete evidence lies in properly interrogating Corwin himself. Given his current circumstances, he may prove more willing to share information about his cousin's involvement in exchange for more lenient treatment regarding his own judgment. Kaelin considered this suggestion carefully before nodding. Arrange the interrogation, he said. I want to be present when it happens, along with Arya, given her direct stake in whatever information he provides. The council meeting continued for another hour. Various strategic considerations discussed and debated as they formulated their approach toward finally exposing Vantryk's role in the broader conspiracy. Arya found herself contributing actively throughout the discussion, her strategic training and personal knowledge of Silver Moon Pack politics proving genuinely valuable to the collective planning. As the meeting concluded and the various advisors departed to attend to their respective responsibilities, Kaelin lingered behind with Arya, studying her thoughtfully as the hall gradually emptied around them. You handled yourself remarkably well in there, he observed. Nora and the other advisors clearly respect your input, despite your unofficial status within Ashwood's formal hierarchy. I suppose old training habits are difficult to fully abandon, Arya said, a small smile touching her lips. Even after everything that's happened, I still find myself thinking strategically about pack politics and leadership challenges. Perhaps that training wasn't wasted after all, Kaelin said gently, echoing sentiments he had expressed before during their weeks together in the wilderness. Whatever happens with the Silver Moon Pack, whether you eventually reclaim your position there or choose an entirely different path, know that you have genuine value and purpose here in Ashwood as well, should you ever wish to claim it. The offer, delivered with quiet sincerity, settled warmly in Arya's chest, despite the significant uncertainty still surrounding her future. Thank you, she said softly. Though right now, my priority remains seeing Vantryk properly exposed and held accountable for everything he's done. Then let's focus our full attention there, Kaelin agreed, offering his hand as they prepared to depart the council hall together. Corwin's interrogation should provide the concrete evidence we need to finally confront Vantryk directly and reclaim everything that conspiracy stole from you. As they left the hall together, walking through the settlement that had so recently and joyfully welcomed their king's return, Arya felt a renewed sense of purpose settling over her, the successful confrontation with Corwin providing tangible proof that justice remained possible, even against seemingly insurmountable conspiracy. Whatever challenges remained in exposing Vantrek fully, whatever risks still waited within her return to Silver Moon Pact territory, she faced them now, with Kaelin steadily beside her, both of them determined to see the full conspiracy exposed and properly answered for, regardless of the difficulty still standing in their path. The interrogation took place later that afternoon, within the secure detention chambers beneath the central meeting hall. Corwin sat bound and visibly diminished from his earlier confidence, his carefully composed arrogance replaced by sullen resignation, now that his conspiracy had been thoroughly exposed before the entire territory. "You should know," Kaelin said, standing before him with Arya and Elias positioned nearby, "that cooperation now may significantly influence how the Pact Council judges your punishment. Continued silence will only ensure the harshest possible consequences." Corwin studied them for a long moment, calculation still evident behind his defeated expression, before finally speaking. "Vantrek approached me nearly a year ago," he admitted quietly. "He recognized shared ambition between our families, proposed a coordinated plan to seize greater influence across both our territories. I won't pretend I resisted the opportunity for long." "Tell us about Arya's exile specifically," Kaelin pressed. "How exactly did Vantrek orchestrate the false evidence used against her?" "He forged her seal using a stolen impression taken from official Pact documents," Corwin said. "Crafted a message designed to appear as genuine correspondence with Ashwood scouts, timed perfectly to coincide with a border patrol he'd already arranged to be compromised. The entire scenario was carefully constructed to ensure Selene would have no choice but to believe the evidence against her own daughter." Arya felt her stomach tighten at the confirmation of exactly how calculated and cruel Vantrek's betrayal had truly been, every detail meticulously planned to destroy her future, beyond any possibility of doubt or defense. "This confession, properly documented, should provide exactly the evidence we need," Elias said quietly, already recording Corwin's admission carefully for future use. As Corwin continued providing additional details about the conspiracy's broader scope, Arya felt the final pieces of her own painful mystery finally settling into place, transforming weeks of uncertainty and grief into concrete, actionable truth. Whatever came next in confronting Vantrek directly, she now possessed exactly the evidence necessary to finally clear her name and expose the true architect of her downfall. The journey back toward the Silver Moon Pact's territory felt entirely different from Arya's initial exile weeks earlier, when she had walked away from those ancient border stones alone, stripped of everything she once believed defined her. This time, she traveled with genuine purpose, flanked by Kaelin and a small contingent of trusted Ashwood warriors, armed with concrete evidence that would finally expose the truth behind her false accusation. As they approached the familiar boundary stones marking the edge of Silver Moon territory, Arya felt her heart pounding, with a complex mixture of anxiety and determination. She had not expected to return here so soon, certainly not under these circumstances, and the weight of confronting her own pack, her own mother, with evidence of such profound betrayal, settled heavily over her. "Are you ready for this?" Kaelin asked quietly, sensing her tension as they paused briefly at the border. "I have to be," Arya said, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. "Vantrek has continued serving within my mother's council all this time, likely believing his conspiracy remains perfectly hidden. It's time he finally answers for what he's done." They crossed the border together, moving directly toward the pack house that had once been Arya's home, the same hall where she had been formally exiled weeks earlier. Word of their approach traveled quickly through the territory, curious and cautious wolves watching from a careful distance as the exiled Luna returned, accompanied by an Alpha King and armed warriors from a neighboring territory. By the time they reached the central hall, Selene Voss had already emerged, flanked by her own guard, her expression a complicated mixture of shock, confusion, and carefully guarded caution as she took in the sight of her exiled daughter, returning with such unexpected company. "Arya," Selene said, her voice tight with barely contained emotion. "What is the meaning of this, and who exactly accompanies you?" "Alpha Selene," Kaelin said, stepping forward with formal, commanding presence. "I am Kaelin Thorne, Alpha King of Ashwood territory." I've come here today alongside your daughter to present evidence of a serious conspiracy that has affected both our territories. Evidence that directly implicates a member of your own council in the false accusations used to exile Arya. Celine's expression shifted rapidly through several emotions, disbelief giving way to something more calculating, as she processed the implications of Kaelin's formal announcement. This is a serious accusation, she said carefully, glancing between Kaelin and Arya with obvious uncertainty. What evidence could possibly justify such claims? Evidence that proves conclusively I was framed, Arya said, stepping forward with steady determination, despite the emotional weight of confronting her mother directly. Vantrick Ashby orchestrated my false accusation using a forged seal and manufactured correspondence, working alongside his cousin Corwin to simultaneously destabilize Ashwood territory through an assassination attempt against Kaelin. At the mention of Vantrick's name, Arya noticed a flicker of genuine alarm cross her mother's expression, quickly masked but unmistakable to someone who had spent her entire life learning to read Celine's carefully guarded emotions. Vantrick has served this pack faithfully for over a decade, Celine said, though her voice carried less conviction than her words suggested. These are serious accusations to level against a trusted advisor without overwhelming proof. We have exactly that kind of proof, Elias said, stepping forward and presenting the documentation they had carefully gathered, including Corwin's recorded confession, detailing Vantrick's precise role in fabricating the evidence used against Arya. Corwin Ashby has already confessed to his own involvement, and his testimony directly implicates Vantrick as the primary architect of the entire conspiracy. Celine studied the documents carefully, her expression growing increasingly troubled as she read through the detailed confession, the financial records connecting Vantrick to outside conspirators, the technical analysis confirming the forged nature of the seal used to frame Arya. Long minutes passed in tense silence as she absorbed the full weight of what the evidence revealed. "Where is Vantrick now?" Celine finally asked, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Whether anger or grief, Arya could not entirely determine. "Within your council chambers, as far as we're aware," Arya said. "He has no idea we've uncovered his conspiracy, or that Corwin has already confessed to his own role in it." Celine's expression hardened with sudden, decisive resolve. "Then we confront him immediately," she said, turning to her personal guard with sharp authority. "Bring Vantrick Ashby to the central hall at once. Tell him nothing beyond that his presence is required." As the guards departed to retrieve Vantrick, Celine turned back to Arya, something raw and vulnerable finally breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "Arya," she said quietly, her voice cracking slightly. "If this evidence proves accurate, if I truly exiled my own daughter based on fabricated lies, I don't know how I'll ever forgive myself for not looking deeper before condemning you so completely." Arya felt tears threatening despite her determination to remain composed, the months of hurt and betrayal finally finding some measure of acknowledgement from the mother, who had once condemned her so swiftly. "I understand why you believe the evidence," she said softly. "Vantrick was clever, thorough, but I need you to properly investigate this now, to give me the chance you didn't give me before." "I will," Celine promised solemnly. "Whatever the evidence reveals, I promise you a full and fair investigation this time." Tense minutes passed as they waited for Vantrick's arrival, the hall gradually filling with curious pack members who had heard whispers of the unfolding confrontation. When Vantrick finally entered, escorted by Celine's guard, his expression carried initial confusion that quickly shifted toward calculating alarm as he took in the assembled gathering, Arya's unexpected presence, and the serious expressions surrounding him. "Alpha Celine," he said carefully, offering a formal bow despite the obvious tension in the room. "You summoned me?" "I did," Celine said, her voice carrying cold, formal authority that Arya had rarely witnessed, directed at anyone within the pack's inner circle. "Serious accusations have been leveled against you, Vantrick. Accusations of conspiracy, forgery, and the orchestration of my own daughter's false exile." Vantrick's composure flickered, just barely, before he recovered with practiced smoothness. "I don't understand," he said, his voice carrying carefully calibrated confusion. "What possible evidence could support such an outrageous claim?" "Your cousin's confession, for one," Kaelin said, stepping forward with cold, deliberate authority. "Corwin Ashby has already admitted his own role in your coordinated conspiracy. detailing exactly how you forged Arya's seal and manufactured the evidence used to secure her exile. The mention of Corwin's confession finally cracked Vantrick's careful composure fully, genuine panic flashing behind his eyes before he attempted, unsuccessfully, to mask it. "Whatever Corwin claims," he said, his voice tightening noticeably, "he's clearly attempting to shift blame to protect himself. I have no connection to whatever conspiracy he's involved in. We also possess technical analysis confirming the forged nature of the seal used against Arya," Elias said, presenting additional documentation. "Analysis that traces the forgery technique directly to methods you would have had unique access to, given your position within the Council's official record-keeping." Vantrick's eyes darted around the hall, clearly searching for some avenue of escape or defense, finding none as the assembled evidence continued mounting against him before an increasingly hostile audience of pack members who had gathered to witness the confrontation. "This is a coordinated attack against my character," Vantrick said, his voice rising with desperate defensiveness, "orchestrated by an exiled traitor seeking revenge, and a foreign king with unclear motivations for interfering in Silver Moon Pack affairs." "Enough," Celine said, her voice cutting through Vantrick's protests with sharp, absolute authority. "I've reviewed the evidence presented today, and I find it entirely convincing. Vantrick Ashby, you stand accused of conspiracy against this pack, forgery of official documentation, and the orchestration of a false exile against my own daughter. Do you have any evidence to refute these serious charges?" Vantrick's expression cycled rapidly through several emotions: calculation, panic, and finally something approaching desperate resignation as he recognized the impossibility of his position before such overwhelming evidence. "Whatever punishment you're planning," he said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, "know that the broader ambitions my family has set into motion extend far beyond my own involvement. Removing me changes nothing about what's already been set in place. Then we'll address those broader ambitions as thoroughly as we've addressed your own betrayal," Celine said coldly, before turning to her guard. "Take him into custody immediately. He will face formal judgment before the full Pack Council, where the evidence gathered today will be presented in complete detail." As the guards moved to restrain Vantrick, his expression twisted with fury and humiliation, similar to Corwin's earlier reaction, the assembled crowd watching with a mixture of shock, outrage, and growing relief as the true architect of Arya's exile was finally exposed and held accountable before the entire pack. Once Vantrick had been led away, Celine turned to Arya, her expression finally breaking fully from its formal alpha composure into something raw and genuinely remorseful. "Arya," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology far greater than words can properly express. I failed you as a mother and as a leader, believing fabricated evidence over my own daughter's word without ever properly investigating the truth." "You believed what appeared to be undeniable proof," Arya said softly, understanding now, with the full clarity of hindsight, exactly how thoroughly Vantrick had constructed his deception. "I don't blame you for believing evidence that was specifically designed to be unquestionable, but I do need you to understand how much that decision cost me, how much pain and uncertainty I carried through every day of my exile." "I understand," Celine said, tears finally breaking through her composed exterior. "And I promise you, formally and completely, full restoration of your title and position within this pack, along with a complete public acknowledgement of the injustice you suffered." Arya felt the weight of weeks of grief and betrayal finally beginning to lift, replaced by something that felt remarkably like closure, the truth finally exposed and properly acknowledged by the very pack that had once so swiftly condemned her. She glanced toward Kaelin, finding him watching the reconciliation with quiet, supportive pride, understanding intuitively that this moment belonged fully to her, regardless of his own role in helping uncover the truth. "Thank you," Arya said softly, embracing her mother, for the first time since the night of her exile, months of accumulated pain and separation, finally finding some measure of resolution in that simple, heartfelt gesture. As the assembled pack members began processing the full implications of everything that had just transpired, murmurs of relief and renewed respect for their returned Luna, spreading steadily through the hall, Arya felt a profound sense of completion settling over her. The conspiracy that had shattered her life, stolen her future, and nearly cost Kaelin his own throne had finally been fully exposed, the true perpetrators held properly accountable, before both territories they had sought to manipulate and control. Whatever came next, whatever decisions awaited her regarding her restored position within the Silver Moon Pack, Arya knew she would face that future with the same steady determination and genuine partnership that had carried her through every challenge since that fateful storm-soaked night when she had first discovered a dying wolf collapsed in the wilderness, unaware of just how profoundly that single act of compassion would transform both their lives forever. That evening, after the formal proceedings had concluded, and Vantrick had been securely placed in the same detention arrangements Corwin currently occupied within Ashwood, Selene called for a private gathering within her personal chambers, inviting only Arya, Kaelin, and a few of her most trusted senior advisors to discuss the path forward. The Pack Council will need to formally review all the evidence before rendering final judgment against Vantrick, Selene explained, settling into a chair across from where Arya and Kaelin sat together. Given the severity of his crimes, and the coordination with outside conspirators against a neighboring territory's leadership, I anticipate the judgment will be severe, likely permanent exile at minimum, possibly more serious consequences depending on the full council's deliberation. What of the broader conspiracy Corwin mentioned? Kaelin asked, his strategic mind still focused on the unresolved threat Corwin had alluded to during his interrogation, the Ashby family ambitions extending beyond Vantrick and Corwin's individual involvement. Selene's expression grew troubled at this consideration. I've begun reviewing the Pack's financial and diplomatic records more thoroughly since learning of Vantrick's betrayal, she said. There are concerning patterns, transactions and communications that suggest broader coordination among various Ashby family members, positioned throughout several territories. I believe this conspiracy extends beyond simply Vantrick and Corwin's individual schemes. That's troubling, Arya said, exchanging a concerned glance with Kaelin. If the Ashby family has been positioning themselves across multiple territories, this could represent a far more significant threat than we initially understood. I agree, Selene said gravely, which is why I believe continued cooperation between our territories may prove essential in fully addressing whatever broader ambitions remain in motion. Kaelin, given everything you and Arya have already accomplished together in exposing this conspiracy's initial phase, I would welcome formal alliance between Ashwood and Silver Moon Pack, ensuring we can properly coordinate our response to whatever threats remain. Kaelin considered this proposal carefully, before nodding with genuine enthusiasm. I would welcome exactly that kind of formal alliance, he said, particularly given how effectively Arya and I have already demonstrated the value of coordinated strategic cooperation between our territories. Selene's gaze shifted toward her daughter, something knowing and warm passing across her expression as she observed the easy, genuine connection between Arya and Kaelin. Speaking of your partnership, she said carefully, I sense there's more to your relationship than simple strategic cooperation. Arya felt a flush of warmth color her cheeks, glancing toward Kaelin before answering honestly. There is, she admitted. Kaelin and I have grown very close during everything we've faced together these past weeks. I care for him deeply, beyond simply our shared efforts to expose this conspiracy. I feel the same, Kaelin added, reaching for Arya's hand with quiet affection. Arya has become genuinely essential to me, both as a strategic partner and as someone I've come to love deeply. Selene studied them both for a long moment, something contemplative passing behind her eyes, before a genuine smile finally broke through her earlier formal composure. I'm glad, she said softly. After everything you've both endured, after the pain my own poor judgment caused you, Arya, I'm relieved to see you found genuine happiness and partnership, regardless of how unconventional the circumstances of your meeting might have been. The warmth of her mother's genuine approval settled comfortably in Arya's chest, another piece of the reconciliation she had not fully realized she needed until receiving it. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more to me than you probably realize. As their private discussion continued, moving toward practical considerations regarding the formal alliance between their territories and the ongoing investigation into the broader Ashby family conspiracy, Arya found herself increasingly optimistic about the future unfolding before her. The devastating injustice of her exile had finally been properly addressed. Her relationship with her mother showed genuine promise of healing after months of painful separation, and her partnership with Kaelin continued deepening into something that felt increasingly permanent and secure. Later that night, After the private council meeting had concluded and various practical arrangements had been discussed regarding the formal alliance and continued investigation, Arya found a quiet moment alone, with Kaelin, on a balcony overlooking the familiar territory of her childhood home. "It's strange," she said softly, gazing out over the moonlit forest that had once felt entirely lost to her. "A few weeks ago, I never imagined I would stand here again, especially not with my name cleared and my mother's genuine apology finally offered." "You earned this outcome," Kaelin said, wrapping a comforting arm around her shoulders, as they both took in the peaceful view. "Through your own courage, your willingness to fight for the truth, despite every obstacle standing in your way." "We earned it together," Arya corrected gently, echoing the sentiment that had become foundational to their partnership throughout the trials of recent weeks. "I couldn't have accomplished any of this without you standing beside me." Kaelin turned to face her fully, his expression soft with genuine affection, as moonlight illuminated his features. "Whatever comes next," he said quietly, "whatever challenges remain, in fully addressing the broader Ashby conspiracy, I want you to know that standing beside you, building this partnership together, has become the most important priority in my entire life. More significant, even than reclaiming my own throne." The sincerity in his words touched Arya deeply, and she leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder as they continued gazing out over the peaceful territory below. "I feel exactly the same way," she said softly. "Whatever future awaits us, I want to build it together with you, regardless of where that path ultimately leads." They remained together on the quiet balcony for a long while, both of them finally allowing themselves a genuine moment of peace and celebration after weeks of danger, uncertainty, and gradually deepening love. The conspiracy that had shattered their individual lives had finally been properly exposed, justice beginning its proper course through formal pact proceedings, and their partnership had emerged from every trial stronger and more certain than ever before. Yet even amid this hard-won peace, both of them understood that Corwin's ominous warning about broader Ashby family ambitions remained unresolved, a lingering threat that would require continued vigilance and cooperation between their two territories in the days ahead. But for tonight, standing together beneath the stars that had witnessed the beginning of their unlikely partnership weeks earlier, in a storm-soaked forest, they allowed themselves simply to celebrate how far they had already come, and how much stronger their bond had grown through every challenge they had faced together. The following days brought a whirlwind of formal proceedings and practical arrangements as the Silver Moon Pact Council convened to review the complete evidence against Vantrick, ultimately rendering a judgment of permanent exile, combined with a formal stripping of his family's remaining influence within the Pact's governing structure. The verdict, delivered before a full assembly of Pact members, provided the kind of public accountability Arya had desperately needed since the night of her own unjust banishment. Selene formally restored Arya's title as heir before that same assembly, offering a genuine, heartfelt public acknowledgement of the injustice her daughter had suffered, along with a promise of more thorough investigation standards moving forward to prevent similar miscarriages of justice within the Pact's future. The Pact members, many of whom had privately doubted the accusations against Arya from the very beginning, welcomed her restoration with visible relief and renewed loyalty. Callan, the guard who had whispered his quiet apology at the border months earlier, approached Arya during the celebration that followed the formal proceedings, his expression carrying genuine remorse and relief. "I should have spoken up more forcefully when it mattered," he admitted quietly. "I'm sorry I let fear silence my doubts about the evidence against you." "You did what you could within the circumstances," Arya said gently, offering him genuine forgiveness despite the pain his silence had once caused her. "What matters now is that the truth has finally been properly acknowledged." As the celebration continued throughout the pack house, Arya found herself reflecting on the profound journey that had brought her to this moment, from the devastating injustice of her initial exile, through weeks of dangerous wilderness survival, unexpected partnership with a hidden Alpha King, and finally, the satisfying exposure of the conspiracy that had sought to destroy them both. Standing now amid genuine celebration and restored honor, with Kaelin steady beside her throughout every step of the proceedings, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for how completely her circumstances had transformed since that fateful storm-soaked night in the wilderness. Yet even amid this celebration, both both Arya and Kaelin remained acutely aware that significant decisions still awaited them regarding their shared future. Decisions that would require careful consideration of both her restored position within the Silver Moon Pack and his ongoing responsibilities as Alpha King of Ashwood territory. Whatever path they ultimately chose, they faced that decision together, bound by the genuine partnership and deep love that had grown steadily throughout every trial they had already overcome, ready to build whatever future awaited them with the same unwavering determination that had already carried them through so much danger and uncertainty. 3 weeks passed since Vantrix's formal judgment, weeks filled with the steady work of rebuilding trust and stability within the Silver Moon Pack, alongside continued investigation into the broader Ashby family conspiracy that both Selene and Kaelin remained determined to fully expose. Arya found herself splitting her time between her restored responsibilities within her mother's pack and increasingly frequent visits to Ashwood territory, where Kaelin's own recovery from the initial conspiracy continued progressing steadily. It was during one such visit to Ashwood, walking together through the ancient forest that gave the territory its name, that Kaelin finally raised the question that had been quietly building between them since the resolution of their shared conspiracy. "Arya," he said, pausing beneath a massive, ancient tree whose branches stretched protectively overhead, "we've spent these past weeks navigating the practical aftermath of everything we uncovered together, but I think it's time we discussed our future more directly." Arya felt her heart quicken slightly at the seriousness in his tone, though the warmth in his eyes suggested nothing but genuine affection rather than concern. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "Your mother has formally restored your title as heir to the Silver Moon Pack," Kaelin said carefully. "That means, eventually, you'll be expected to assume leadership of your own territory, continuing the legacy your family has built across generations. I want you to know, completely and without reservation, that I support whatever path feels right to you, even if that path ultimately leads you toward leading Silver Moon Pack independently, rather than building a life together with me here in Ashwood." Arya studied him carefully, understanding the genuine sacrifice implicit in his words, the willingness to release her toward her own destined path, rather than insisting she abandon her restored legacy for his sake. "That's remarkably generous of you," she said softly. "But Kaelin, I've had weeks to consider exactly what I want for my future, and I don't believe leading Silver Moon Pack independently is actually the path that calls to me most strongly." Hope flickered behind his amber eyes, though he remained carefully patient, allowing her to fully articulate her thoughts without pressure. "What calls to you then?" he asked gently. "You do," Arya said simply, reaching for his hands with quiet certainty. "Building a life and a future together, wherever that future takes us. My mother remains capable of leading Silver Moon Pack for many years yet, and I believe strongly in the alliance we've built between our territories. Perhaps my greatest contribution moving forward isn't claiming individual leadership of a single pack, but rather helping build and strengthen the partnership between Silver Moon and Ashwood, ensuring both territories remain protected against whatever threats the broader Ashby conspiracy still represents." Kaelin's expression softened with profound relief and joy at her words, understanding fully the significance of what she was proposing. "You would consider making Ashwood your home?" he asked, his voice carrying careful hope despite his obvious happiness at her suggestion. "I would consider making wherever you are my home," Arya said softly, emotion coloring her voice as she spoke words that felt both new and completely certain. "These past weeks, everything we've built together, the trust and partnership and genuine love that grew between us despite every obstacle standing in our way, that's what I want to continue building, regardless of which territory serves as our formal home base." Kaelin pulled her close, his expression alight with genuine happiness as he processed the full weight of her declaration. "Arya Voss," he said softly, his voice carrying deep, reverent affection, "would you consider becoming my Luna, ruling alongside me here in Ashwood, building the kind of partnership between our territories that ensures neither of us ever faces conspiracy or betrayal alone again?" Tears of genuine joy threatened as Arya absorbed the full significance of his question, recognizing in it not simply a romantic proposal, but a genuine offer of partnership built on the foundation of trust, respect, and shared purpose they had cultivated together since that fateful storm-soaked night weeks earlier. "Yes," she said, her voice steady with absolute certainty, despite the emotion coloring it. "Yes, I would be honored to become your Luna." Kalen's answering smile carried a warmth and joy that seemed to illuminate the entire forest surrounding them, and he leaned forward, capturing her lips in a tender, celebratory kiss that spoke of every trial they had already overcome together, and every future promise still waiting to be fulfilled. The following weeks brought a flurry of preparation as both Ashwood and Silvermoon Pack began organizing what would become a historic ceremony, formally uniting the two territories through Arya and Kalen's union, while simultaneously celebrating the successful exposure and resolution of the conspiracy that had once threatened to destroy them both. Celine took an active role in the preparations, her genuine joy at her daughter's happiness evident in every careful detail she helped coordinate. "I'm so proud of you," Celine told Arya during one of their planning sessions, genuine warmth evident in her voice as she helped finalize details for the upcoming ceremony. "Not simply for the strength you showed in surviving your exile, or the courage you demonstrated in exposing Vantrix's conspiracy, but for the wisdom you've shown in choosing genuine partnership over convenient obligation. Kalen clearly values you as an equal, someone whose strength and judgment he genuinely respects, rather than simply as a political alliance. He's shown me what genuine partnership looks like," Arya said softly, reflecting on everything they had built together since her exile began. "Something I honestly wasn't certain I would ever find again, after losing everything I thought defined my future." The ceremony itself took place on a clear evening beneath a full moon, held at the border between Ashwood and Silvermoon territories, symbolically uniting both packs at the exact point where their lands met. Warriors and pack members from both territories gathered together, many meeting for the first time, as the formal alliance between their leaders solidified the growing relationship between their respective homes. Arya stood beneath an archway of woven branches and wildflowers, her heart full as she watched Kalen approach, dressed formally for the first time since she had known him, his usual practical attire replaced by ceremonial robes that somehow still carried the same quiet strength and dignity she had come to associate with him throughout their weeks together in the wilderness. As they exchanged their formal vows before both assembled packs, promising partnership, loyalty, and genuine love, regardless of whatever future challenges awaited them, Arya felt the profound significance of the moment settling over her. This ceremony represented not simply a romantic union, but the formal culmination of everything they had fought to build together since that storm-soaked night when she had first discovered a dying wolf collapsed in the wilderness, unaware of the profound way that single act of compassion would transform both their lives. With this union, the officiant announced formally to the assembled crowd, Ashwood and Silvermoon Pack stand, joined not merely through alliance, but through genuine partnership between their leaders, ensuring both territories remain protected and united against whatever threats the future might bring. The assembled crowd erupted into genuine celebration, warriors and pack members from both territories embracing the historic significance of the moment, understanding that whatever remained of the broader Ashby family conspiracy, whatever challenges still waited beyond this celebratory evening, both territories now stood genuinely united, stronger together than either could have remained alone. As the formal ceremony concluded and celebration continued late into the night, Arya found a quiet moment alone with Kalen, both of them finally able to simply appreciate the profound journey that had brought them to this joyful conclusion. "Do you remember?" Kalen said softly, wrapping his arms around her as they watched the celebration continuing around them. "When I first opened my eyes in that cave, barely conscious, and saw you kneeling beside me in the darkness. I had no idea, in that moment, that the stranger tending my wounds would become the single most important person in my entire life." "I remember," Arya said, smiling warmly at the memory that felt both distant and vividly immediate simultaneously. "I nearly walked away, you know. Every instinct I'd developed during my exile told me helping a stranger was too dangerous, too risky, given everything I'd already lost. I'm grateful you didn't listen to that instinct," Kalen said softly, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "So am I," Arya agreed, leaning into his embrace with genuine contentment. "Everything that's happened since that night, the danger, the discovery, the conspiracy we uncovered together, all of it led us exactly here, to this moment, surrounded by both our families finally united in genuine partnership." They remained together beneath the full moon, watching their combined packs celebrate the historic alliance now formally sealed between them, both of them acutely aware that challenges likely remained ahead, the broader Ashby family conspiracy still requiring continued investigation and vigilance in the months to come. But for tonight, surrounded by genuine joy and celebration, they allowed themselves simply to appreciate how far their unlikely partnership had already carried them, from a chance encounter in a storm-soaked forest to this profound, historic union between their two territories. Whatever future challenges awaited them, Arya knew with absolute certainty that she would face them exactly as she had faced everything since that fateful night, standing steadily beside Kaelin, partners in every sense of the word, ready to protect and build the future they had both fought so hard to reclaim. The exiled Luna, who had once protected a dying wolf, without knowing his true identity, had found not merely her own restored honor, but a genuine partnership built on trust, courage, and unwavering love, proving that sometimes the greatest transformations begin with a single act of compassion, offered to a stranger in need, regardless of the risk such kindness might carry. And beneath the full moon that had witnessed their formal union, surrounded by both their families, finally standing together in genuine alliance, Arya and Kaelin faced their future with the same steady determination and deep, abiding love that had carried them through every trial since the very beginning of their extraordinary journey together. In the weeks that followed the ceremony, Arya settled gradually into her new life as Luna of Ashwood, balancing her responsibilities within her adopted territory, alongside continued involvement in Silver Moon Pack affairs, ensuring the alliance between both territories remained strong and genuinely collaborative rather than merely symbolic. She worked closely with Elias and Nora, learning the specific needs and traditions of Ashwood's people, applying the leadership training she had once believed permanently lost to her when exile stripped away her original future. Kaelin proved himself, day after day, exactly the kind of partner he had promised to be during their weeks together in the wilderness, valuing her strategic input in matters of territorial governance, genuinely collaborating rather than simply expecting deference to his existing authority. Together, they addressed the practical challenges of uniting two previously separate territories, working through logistical complications with the same patient, methodical partnership that had carried them through every danger they had already overcome. The investigation into the broader Ashby family conspiracy continued steadily as well, Elias and Nora coordinating with trusted allies across several territories to trace the full extent of the family's ambitions. Slowly, methodically, they identified and addressed additional conspirators, ensuring the network of corruption that had once threatened both Ashwood and Silver Moon Pack could never again gain the kind of coordinated influence Vantrick and Corwin had briefly achieved. One evening, several months after their formal union, Arya found herself once again standing at the edge of the same ridge where she had first learned Kaelin's true identity, watching the sunset paint the valley below in brilliant shades of gold and amber. Kaelin joined her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind, as they both took in the peaceful view. "It's strange," Arya said softly, leaning back into his warm embrace. "How much has changed since we first stood in a place like this together, back when you were still simply Cade to me, and I had no idea what enormous complications your true identity would bring into my life. Any regrets?" Kaelin asked, a teasing warmth coloring his voice despite the genuine curiosity behind the question. "None," Arya said firmly, turning in his arms to meet his gaze directly. "Every challenge we faced together, every danger we overcame, it all led us exactly here, to this life we've built together. I wouldn't trade any of it, even the difficult parts, for a different, easier path that never brought us together in the first place." Kaelin's expression softened with profound love and gratitude as he studied her face in the fading evening light. "I feel exactly the same way," he said quietly. "Finding you in that storm remains the single most significant turning point of my entire life, transforming not just my survival, but everything I understand about genuine partnership and love." They remained together as the sun continued its slow descent below the horizon, both of them reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them from a chance encounter in a rain-soaked forest to this life of genuine partnership, shared purpose, and deepening love. The conspiracy that had once threatened to destroy them both had been thoroughly addressed. Their combined territories stood stronger and more unified than either had been individually, and the future stretching before them carried genuine promise, built on the solid foundation of trust and courage they had cultivated together through every trial they had already overcome. As darkness settled fully over the valley below, stars beginning to emerge across the clear evening sky, Arya felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude settling over her, understanding fully now how completely her circumstances had transformed since that devastating night of her exile so many months earlier. She had lost everything she once believed defined her identity and purpose, only to discover, through unexpected partnership and genuine love, a future far richer and more meaningful than anything she could have imagined during her darkest days of solitary survival. The exiled Luna had found her way home after all, not to the territory she had once expected to lead, but to a genuine partnership built on trust, courage, and unwavering love, standing steadily beside the fearless Alpha King she had once protected without ever knowing his true identity, ready to face whatever future still awaited them together, bound by the same deep commitment and genuine care that had carried them through every challenge since the very beginning of their extraordinary, unlikely journey.